Gotta open these nuts. Nuts in my mouth.
Whilst I would make a decision whether or not I was meeting a transgender person, I would talk to them how they wanted to talk to them. The fact that you're making it law is impediment on freedom of speech. Yeah, that's a good story. In my sense, there were two things I rejected. One was that the government, for the first time in the history of Canada, English common law, actually had the content of speech. I don't know what this is. That's the local that's not happening. Even though, right, this might seem to me like sort of, what I'm always interested in is power, and where power is. And, like, you know, I guess I've got towards like sort of structuralist and left, and like a lot of things I think even right, and you know, I agree with that. But what I think, the reason I think that the controversy had all on both sides, the reason it had an English on the other side, is because it seems that, I mean, the objections that other English presenting to you, it seems to me that, it seems that a transgender person is in a position of vulnerability. But you're saying this is not about transgender, this is about language, it's about pressure. That's what you're saying. That was my claim. About me, she's got no strong view, I'm guessing. I don't have sort of strong view. Yeah, like there's all those. I don't understand it, but well, I basically that legislation passed. Yes. Well, and I think the situation is different in the US because other countries have a situation in the US is actually more balanced than most of those two countries. Because I would say the left, the radical left, has a pretty decent hold on a number of institutions. But then conservatives aren't without power in these states. They occupy most of the elected positions. The usual question is count. You don't want to be identified with any of those. Right, like you would say you're right on the left or conservative or really down left. Say what you believe in God. Well, my political views are complicated because I don't think they like free flowing information, they like say fluid boundaries because information is really not important boundaries. So you reject ideologically you reject these taxonomies that you identify basically on the basis of research, like empiricism in a sense. You say, like, you know, I'm an open-minded type person. This language is clinical psychology, so your faith is clinical psychology. And you're like, well, I've done a fair bit of research on that one. Temperamental, predictive, political predisposition. By studying personality. So liberal types are high in critical openness.
game is huge.
One of the problems with creative people have two. One is they have a hard time establishing an identity. And the second is they have a hard time monetizing their creativity. It's very difficult to get money. You can make money for other people, but usually you get money from other people. As a result of external structures, the imposition of external structures on you, like make money. The other one, identity, similarly, there is a clear contradiction around identity in that, like, it seems to be one of the hacks on these systems, e.g., say if women are being paid less money, your argument would be, well, hold on a minute, there are other factors other than gender in here, exactly agree with the data. Intersectional feminism.
Stay down.
Build a website that can with WordPress.com.
Circumvent the problem and pretend that it's not. I try to be as kind as possible, but no. Good. I'm tempted to, because I'm fundamentally an agreeable person. I'm surprisingly, but I'm convinced that it's better to face things with the things and to get to the bottom of things, even though that's also have to be constituted. Useful psychotherapist because you can't let things go. They have to be dealt with, just like they have to be dealt with. You're
one for the good guys.
A watcher the other night. He was at my lecture in...
My strength grows ever greater.
He was a 17-year-old boy. And he said that my work had been very helpful to him. His father had died suddenly about 6 months before. And he found his dad when he was dying and was very, very shocked and horrified and hurt by what had happened. And I had recommended on my YouTube lectures that one thing you could aim for was to be the strongest person at your father's funeral. And so that's what he did. And he helped his mom, and he wrote a 200-word eulogy and got through it. And so, good for him. That's strength and necessary. It's a terrible thing that happened, but he did everything he could not to make it any worse than it had to be.
But do you never see that showing weakness can be a strength?
Not weakness, vulnerability. That's a whole different thing. To admit to the fact that you're vulnerable, that's a form of courage. That's not a form of weakness. But that means that you take whatever steps are necessary to deal with it. It isn't some facade that you're invulnerable. No one is invulnerable by any stretch.
I'm sure that wasn't here before.
Stand up and face
Well, it looks like we won't be selling that way anytime soon.
Well, that's not much help to us, eh? You can't get through to Arborea. You can't find out how to get old Mordigan what for. Wait, there's that pillar of light in the sea north of Sniffelheim, eh? Well, it's just a thought, but maybe that's worth a wee look. It's not too far off, after all.
It's hard to know how to factor that in. But then, I think that young women are encouraged a lot, which is fine as far as I'm concerned. But I think that that's less true for young men now, because we believe that there's something pernicious about confidence and activity as part of, I suppose, the part of the issue that we characterize Western societies as I don't think that equality of opportunity is a problem. I think that's a great thing. Anyone who makes sense is happy. Purely self-centered. You want to set up an environment where everyone who's had ability could be maximally exploited by everyone else. Because then we can all benefit from each other's talents. And so equality of opportunity is an absolutely useful fundamental principle. But that has nothing to do with equality of outcome. Those things aren't even in the same conceptual universe. And to strive for equality extraordinary. It has the purpose to have extraordinary things as well as impossible. Differences between men and women in the world.
So, we need to get word. You were lucky to slip the hook when last we met. You will not be so fortunate this time. In the name of my lord and master, I shall send your broken bodies to the bottom of the ocean.
And so what you do is you offer men and women...
Well, this isn't looking good. If Pearly Gates can't do the trick, I don't very well know what can.
Tens of thousands of people in multi-country samples and then you look at the difference between men and women, and then you rank order that by, well,
Your hand.
And what you find is
The power of the luminary.
the more different the men and women become.
What was that?
That's the stuff, laddie. Without that barrier, we should be able to land a blow or two. Right, you lot. Time to finally put a wee dent in our friend here.
You worms really believe you can defeat the mighty Aetherine? You will sink without trace.
Trying to flee.
victory!
Not to hear it. Except when people gerrymander the data. It's like, what do you mean by equality? Do you want women to have their free choice or not? If you do, they're not going to pick occupations that are the same as the occupations men pick.
But we have structures today that women need to struggle.
But how? How could the mighty Alizarin be defeated?
We have lower rates of
Wait, that lightning you summoned. Could it be? Could you be the luminary? Lord Mordagon!
learn boys to be more sensitive, but also young girls to become more self-confident. And I think that's very important to.
Well, the problem with that is the data indicate that the consequence of the policies that you're promoting have maximized the differences between men and women.
We showed you, ya oversized sea slug. Think you're a match for the luminary? Think again, pal. Right, we'd better get a move on. We need to give Mordagon a growling, but first, we need to find out how we can hurt him. He still doesn't know you're alive, but it's only a matter of time. Best get a move on, eh?
About 1895, there was a series of technological revolutions that were extraordinarily powerful that allowed women to step forward freely of many of the burdens that had kept them back in the past. Birth control being one of them, but only one. Sanitary facilities of all sorts, plumbing had a huge role to play. Tampons had a huge role to play after the sanitary napkins. All of these technologies developed that enabled women to move forward with less biological impediments. That's what happens to try. Shared identity. The evidence that people find in tribes is that's the entire evidence of the human race. And the farther back you go in time, and the smaller the tribal groups become, the higher the rates of inter-tribal warfare and the higher the rates of homicide. Yes, and when I'm talking about gender issues, for example, that's actually one of my fields of expertise.
What's going on?
And it's
My heart's beating like crazy.
As I said as well, it's been replicated 3 times in the last month. The London Times came out 3 weeks ago and said that the finding that gender differences maximize as egalitarian...
The fall of Yggdrasil has changed everything. It's more than likely Sniffleheim didn't escape unscathed. Which is why I think we'd better check in on Queen Frizzabel before we head off to Arborea. That all right with you? Right. We're away to the castle to see the Queen. While we're at it, why don't you lot take a look around town and make sure everything's okay? What's the matter, Eric? You look like you've seen a ghost, lad.
It's nothing. I'm fine. You want us to take a look around town, right? I'm all over it.
On second thoughts, you're coming with us. You're in no fit state to be wandering round.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be a burden.
Come on now, laddie. This isn't like you. Chin up, eh? A stroll to the castle will do you the power of good.
I am a great skeptic of well-meaning attempts to adjust large social systems on the basis of ideology. But that doesn't make me conservative. It just makes me an educated social scientist.
When are you promoting yourself?
When am I provoking myself? Oh, being called a Nazi, I find somewhat provoking. That, I think one of the most absurd days. No, certainly not. One of the most absurd days in my life in the last 2 years, and there's been plenty of them, was a day probably 3 months ago where I was accused by one magazine in the UK of being a Jewish shill and another magazine in the United States of being an alt-right Nazi. I thought, well, that's it. I've pretty much covered both ends of the insult barrels. It's like, yeah, that's right. So you can average that out to 0, I suppose. So, I find that somewhat provoking. But you know, you take the good with the bad, and I'm not complaining about it. But it is provoking.
Is it true that you have an opinion about people having to stay married if they have children? I mean, we have
Yes, it's better
divorced
if
men.
they do. It's better if they do.
I think most people would agree that that's the best. But as far as I understand, you think that the laws should say that we have to stay together.
Well, it isn't obvious to me that the liberalization of the divorce laws in the 60s was for everyone's best interest. Now, exactly what that means, I'm not sure. I mean, it's okay for people to go to hell in a handbasket in their own particular means of choosing. But we do know that stable, intact, two-parent families are better for children. So, you know, it depends on who you put first. And look, I'm not saying that everyone who's got divorced is reprehensible. I understand that life is very difficult and that it's a very hard thing to maintain a relationship over a very long period of time. But it's not obvious to me that we're better off for the additional plethora of choices. So we'll see.
Isn't that an individual choice and not something that the law should decide?
Well, it depends to some degree on whether the law should advocate for children. I mean, children really can't speak for themselves, can they? They need some authority to speak for them. And so we do know, like the data, for example, on child welfare indicates it's crystal clear that children from intact two-parent families do better on virtually every measure that you could possibly imagine. So why are we supposed to think of that? It's irrelevant. It's like maybe the rule should be if you don't have children, then no problem. Divorce is no problem. But if you have children, and plus, it's not like divorce solves the problem with regards to your relationship with your ex. It often produces a whole boatload of problems that you didn't expect. So, but I'm not advocating draconian measures to keep people together who don't want to be together now. That horse has already left the barn.
Should there be an age limit, like on the children, where you can divorce, or?
Well, the children are the less affected. Yeah. So,
What's the ideal age?
divorce?
Yes.
45 or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what the ideal is.
What about when you see yourself? Who was your masculine role model?
Some of my friends development, especially after your after the age of about 4. But I would definitely say it was my father.
And how would you describe his masculinity?
Well, to your point, he spent a tremendous amount of time with me when I was a kid. And they're very fond memories as far as I'm concerned. Like when I was very young, 2 and 3, my dad would come home from work. He spent an hour and a half with me a night for a long time, teaching me to read, which has been of inestimable benefit with me. And he did many things with me. You know, we hunted and trapped and canoed and fished and camped. And he was a harsh guy in many ways. He was a disciplinarian in some sense. But he was very honest and very good craftsman, and so I learned a lot about trying to conduct yourself in a respectful manner from him. So,
What were you, a tough kid, or were you a careful kid, or a kind kid?
I guess it depends on what you mean by tough. No, I don't think if you would have met me when I was a kid, you would have thought I was tough. I'm kind of a tender-hearted character, and I was skipped a grade, and I was small for my age, and so I certainly wasn't physically tough in the standard sense. Because I was small and because I'd been put ahead of grade, I was never particularly facile at sports, and that was kind of a problem. I did something about that when I got older, but I hung around with tough kids, but that was partly because most of the kids that were in the town I grew up in were either tough kids or were sort of off the radar entirely. So, and maybe that was a certain amount of compensation. I could defend myself verbally fairly well, but that tended to get me hung up by my shirt collar and closet, catch with on the stairs and that sort of thing in junior high. So,
Is it like, did you come from an environment where weakness was a bad thing, where self-pitying was a bad thing?
Where self-pitying was a bad thing, I would say yes. I come from that background, but that was part of the course I was saying when I grew up. I mean, where I grew up, it was still a frontier place in some sense. You know, my town was only 50 years old, and people were essentially self-reliant. That was possible. It was certainly the case within my family on both my mother and father's side. And the idea was, but this wasn't particularly, what would you say, unique to my family. You know, the ethos was feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to be of much utility. You should get out there and do what you can do. Yes, if you can do that. And I got lots of encouragement from my parents, both of them. Certainly I have a very good relationship with my mother, who I love very much. And we shared a sense of humor, which was lovely. And my dad, although he was a harsh taskmaster, also was very encouraging to me in that he believed that I could do whatever I put my mind to. And he helped instill that conviction in a manner that I hope wasn't and isn't too narcissistic. It wasn't a matter of privilege, it was a matter of drive and dedication. And so that was one of the things that's so sad about what I'm doing. You know, I'm going all around the world and I'm talking to many, many people. I've talked to about 250,000 people in the last 6 months, and I offer encouraging words. You know, that I believe that people are stronger than their misfortunes. I believe that if you turn around and confront the vulnerability that's part and parcel of life, you'll find within yourself a strength that will transcend that. And I believe that not only to be true, but supported by the best clinical evidence. And that it's important for lost young people, male and female alike, to develop a vision and take on some responsibility and understand that they have a vital role to play in the world. That the lack of their best hurts everything. And I think that's true. And the sad thing is that there's very many people that are not encouraged. And it takes so little to encourage them that it's rather tragic. You know, I have people come up to me, and I mean all, and by all the time, I mean many people every day in the lectures and on the street who tell me I was in a bad place.
a semblance of a happy family life, or to say, I'm sorry, this doesn't work, we'll continue to love you, but we'll part and we'll love you the rest of our lives, and maybe we even can be happy on our different.
Well, sometimes, often, you have to make the best of a bad lot. You know, I mean, sometimes the best possible choice isn't there in front of you, and I would say, well, it's simply up to each person to decide under the circumstances which of those pathways forward would be likely to cause the least amount of misery. Well, you know, for you, for your wife, for your kids, you know, you have to balance all of that out. That's not an easy thing to do. I would also say that by the time it comes to the point where you're divorcing, all you may have left are one or two suboptimal choices. And you also find what I do as well, try to lecture about what sort of interactions might facilitate a marriage such that it's less likely to end up in a situation like that. Now, sometimes people have irreconcilable differences, and there's nothing that can be done about it. People are not good at negotiating, partly because they won't admit what they want, because then they know if they're not getting it, they'll make their criteria for failure clear, and that's why themselves vague. Because they don't know what they want, they can't communicate it to their partners, and they don't know how to do that anyways, because they're not very good at negotiating. And then they avoid conflict, and so then the conflict, because when you avoid conflict, all you just store it up for the future. I've seen lots of people on the brink of divorce and in horrible marital situations, horrible family situations, and you know they have 25,000 disputes that haven't been settled. And at that point, it's like maybe divorce is the best option, but that doesn't mean that it was the best option from the beginning. So hopefully people can learn to negotiate and to tell each other the truth, and that will increase the probability that they can maintain their relationships in a stable manner. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you didn't do that, because I don't know anything about your situation. So,
but I'm a little bit surprised that you don't take into account our level of irrationality. We're super irrational people. When you discuss, it's like we can all just agree on these things and look at the science and we'll fix everything. That's not how it goes.
I don't think people are irrational at all, and I think that it's very difficult for us to negotiate, and it's amazing that we ever live in peace at all. Yeah, tremendously difficult.
One last question. When are you irrational?
When I'm hungry,
What happens then?
little things bother me far more than they would bother any reasonable person. So that's, and I would say, if you find that you're irrational like that frequently, one of the things you might try is to eat something.
And you have a peculiar diet. You have your own.
You could say that again, yes.
What is it? What's the?
Well, there seems to be some sort of autoimmune condition in my family, and some of it's also reflected in my wife's family, unfortunately. And the culmination of that was that my daughter had an extraordinarily serious set of autoimmune dysfunctions that caused her an endless amount of misery and destruction. And she found out about 3 years ago, as a consequence of very careful experimentation, that if she ate nothing but meat, then all her symptoms disappeared. So, and her primary symptoms were degenerative bone disease that had been diagnosed as idiopathic arthritis, which means arthritis with no known cause. And she had her ankle and her hip replaced when she was in her teens because of that, and had 38 other afflicted joints. So it was hell. And she cottoned on to the fact that diet had something to do with it, for a variety of reasons I can't go into, and radically restricted all her symptoms disappeared.
That is what you do as well.
Yes, well, I had men that got all of the same symptoms, and I watched what happened to her, and I thought, well, that's impossible, because it was, and she encouraged me to try it. I can try anything. You know, and so I started for a month, and I had changes almost immediately. So I continued with a very restricted diet for about 2 years, and extraordinarily restricted for the last 8 months. So, and that seems to be working for me
subscribe.
How much responsibility do you feel you have, particularly guys the alt-right, as you say, some of them have enjoyed your work and say, I'm not one of you boys, I'm not with you. They haven't enjoyed it. I've definitely read bits on the internet.
Read more.
You sold 2 million copies of 12 Rules for Life. You have 800,000 followers on Twitter, 1.4 million followers on YouTube. What is it that you're selling that so many people want to buy?
I don't think I'm selling anything.
Well, I went to a show where you were selling tickets to your show, so people are willing to pay a lot of money to see you speak. What is it that you think that people are hungry for? They want to hear.
They're hungry for a discussion of the relationship between responsibility and need. We haven't had that discussion in our culture for 50 years. We've concentrated on rights and privileges. Freedom, constitution. These are all useful things. And that's not good. Because if people are moored shallowly, then storms wreck them. And storms come along. So I'm talking to people about how they can build a foundation underneath them that works. And people need to know that, because otherwise their lives are harder than they need to be.
What is it that you have?
Oh, I can't believe I'm already tired.
No one else is right now.
Well, I think that is what I'm offering. That's not part of the public discussion, and it's grounded in my clinical knowledge. So I've been a clinician for a very long time, and I'm familiar with the works of most of the great 20th century clinicians and a reasonable amount of philosophy and a good swath of literature. And I'm a credible scientist, and so I can bring that all together. And I've tried to bring it all together and to make a case for the significance of individual life and the psychological necessity of courage and nobility and responsibility, these things that sound old-fashioned, but are old-fashioned in the best sense. They're old-fashioned because they've lasted forever and they're absolutely necessary. And people need a call to responsibility because they need to mature. They need to want to be adults. And I don't think we do a very good job in our culture of making a case for why it's a good thing to be an adult.
And 2 things really made you famous, which is, first of all, is the book 12 Rules for Life. The second one, I think, was an interview that went viral with Kathy Newman of Channel 4 News, which she talked about
Joe
men
Rogan's
and women.
podcast is helping.
Right, he's got a big, big following. But that was, I think, really fascinating, that interview, because it was specifically about men and women. And you said at the time, YouTube skews very male, and your fan base is very male. Is that still the case? Are you still mostly primarily talking to men?
I would say the talks are probably 60-40, 65-35 male to female. The book sales, I don't know. I doubt it, because usually it's women who buy books, although men do buy non-fiction if they buy books. We don't know the demographics on the books. But the book has definitely expanded my audience, I would say. And that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I never set out specifically to talk to men. My students for most years at university have been primarily female. I think most of my graduate students have been female. It might be about 50-50, but I think it would probably tilt more in the direction of female. So it wasn't something I set out to do. I think, though, that, as I said earlier, well, I can't tell how much of it is merely a consequence of the fact that YouTube skews so male. It might also be something to do with the call to take on voluntary responsibility. I'm not exactly sure why that would be more necessary for men right now. I think it might be because our culture confuses men's desire for achievement and confidence with the patriarchal desire for tyrannical power. And that's a big mistake. Those aren't the same thing, even a bit. So it is very inappropriate psychologically and sociologically to confuse them. So,
well, one of the things I want to come back to is this idea. So you say in the book, there is masculine order and feminine chaos.
No, actually, I say that those are symbolic representations of the two things.
Right, okay. So why? Why is order masculine?
I think it's because our primary social hierarchy structures are fundamentally masculine.
And that's not the patriarchy.
Well, it's not the modern idea of the patriarchy, that's for sure.
I mean, so that's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance in society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
A very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper-successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
But I could say equally well that most rape victims are women. You know, terrible things happen to people of both sexes.
And you could say that with perfect utility, but that doesn't provide any evidence for the existence of a male-dominated patriarchy.
Well,
It just means that terrible things happen to both genders, which they certainly do.
But there are almost no women who rape men, for example. So that is an asymmetry there in sexual violence.
Well, yes, there's an asymmetry in all sorts of places, but that doesn't mean that Western culture is a male-dominated patriarchy. The fact that there are asymmetries has nothing to do with your basic argument.
No, but you might...
This is a trope that people just accept. Western society is a male-dominated patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. That's not true. And even if it has a patriarchal structure to some degree, the fundamental basis of that structure is not power, it's competence. That's why our society works. It's only when a structure degenerates into tyranny that the fundamental relationships between people become dependent on power. It's not power. If you hire a plumber who's likely to be male, it's not because there's roving bands of tyrannical plumbers forcing you to make that choice. And it's the case with almost every interaction that you have at the face of our culture. You're dealing with people who are offering a service of one form or another, who are usually part of the broad middle class, and what you're looking for is the person who can offer the best service, and you can find it. It's not a consequence of being dominated by anything that's tyrannical. And then again, our culture, our Western culture, which is by no means perfect, and certainly has tyrannical elements like all cultures do, is the least tyrannical society that's ever been produced, and certainly the least tyrannical society that exists now. So where's the patriarchy exactly?
Well, saying that it's the least tyrannical society is not the same as saying it's not a tyrannical society.
That's exactly why I said it was the least tyrannical.
But that's what I mean. So you haven't debunked the existence of patriarchy, then you said that actually now is better for women.
You have to demonstrate its existence.
Okay, well let's go through it. I'm writing a book about feminism in the moment. Until 1919, there were professions that women were barred from. They simply were not allowed to do it. Until 1880s.
Why would you blame men for that?
Because who was in those professions? Who was guarding entry to those professions? Who was worried about losing their status if women became doctors?
Why was it emancipated women in the 20th century, just out of curiosity?
Well, a couple of different things. I think it was technology. I think it was the pill helped enormously because it gave
When was that developed?
Well, in the 60s.
Right, so that wasn't 1919.
No, but I also think it was a series of legal changes that started in Britain with the Married Women's Property Act, which said for the first time women are full legal beings under the law. They can own property. And that, to me, is a structure that has continued throughout, from a time when women didn't have the same legal rights as men to now, when they mostly do, but culture still lags behind it. I don't think you and I are necessarily talking at such cross purposes. It's just that your conception of patriarchy, as I see it in the book, is that quite a lot of men are quite nice and would do nice things for women. And
no, that's not my conception. I don't require men or advise them to be nice.
Well, you do talk about the guy who's the tampon king, the sanitary towel king of India, right?
I wouldn't call that nice.
Okay,
I call that brave.
Okay.
Did you read about his life when he was trying to develop that?
Yeah.
God, it was absolutely miserable, and he did it anyways. He freed all sorts of women as a consequence.
And I think that was
nice. That's courageous. That's noble. That's visionary. It's not nice.
I think it is also nice. I think it is also something that is, it is honouring your social obligations.
I'm not so sure that that's a social obligation, because many other people would have done it had it been a social obligation. He said what he was concerned about. He saw that his wife was suffering with her monthly period and had to choose between feeding her family and taking care of herself properly, and chose to feed her family and thought he would do something about that. That goes way past nice, especially given what it had to suffer through. fuel the experimentation that produced his eventual technology. So, like, this whole patriarchy thing, I think you have no idea how pernicious and dangerous it is.
Well, no, I don't. I really don't.
Throughout history have fundamentally cooperated to push back against the absolute catastrophe of existence. The terrible death rate, the probability of chronic starvation, early death, disease, the difficulty of raising children, all the death that was associated with that. And to look backwards in time and say, well, basically what happened was men took the upper hand and persecuted women in this tyrannical patriarchy. It's absolutely dreadful misreading of history. It's a terrible thing to teach young women, and it's a horrible thing to inflict upon men.
I mean, I absolutely disagree with you. I think that's like saying slavery in the US was actually, most people cooperate. Well, no, you didn't. You had a system where one set of people owned another set of people. And until women got full legal rights, they could own property themselves, they could work. Essentially, they were owned. They were first owned by their fathers and then by their husbands.
To the domination by men.
Yeah.
You said that you thought that what emancipated women primarily in the 20th century was technological revolution.
Primarily, but that's one of two. I think that's
it's
two
not
things.
Primarily, eh?
No.
I don't think the pill was a primary force in the emancipation of women.
I think
or
it
the
was
invention of tampons, let's say, or the provision of proper sanitary facilities, toilets, and that sort of thing. You're thinking instead it was the action of courageous feminists in the 1920s that produced a social revolution that overthrew the patriarchy. That's your theory.
Yeah, I think
that's a foolish theory.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear you say that, but I think to quote you in the Kathy Newman interview, I think it's a multivariate, right? I think there are lots of different things that all contributed to women's rights.
Well, then let's not be assuming that Western society was a tyrannical patriarchy.
Well, no, that's one of them, and then other things happened as well. So you have the pill, you have the dishwasher and white goods, labour-saving devices in the home. I think all of those were really important. But you also have things like campaigns for the vote.
Yes, you also have things like that, yes.
So how, when in a system that existed in England until 1918, when
why would you even want to look at history like that? What's your goal?
Because I think the people who don't look at history are condemned to repeat it, and I think that we are.
What are we going to do? The persecution of women. Now, do you think that's a realistic possibility?
Yeah, we're sitting here.
How do you see that?
We're sitting here in America, right, where we've just had a fifth judge appointed to the Supreme Court who is now anti-abortion, is now conservative. I think that abortion rights actually are fundamental to women being able to function as full humans in society, and I think that is now under threat in America. I think it is extremely smug and complacent to think civilization has peaked, it's all upwards from here.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
It's a living. Like, there are lots of people who agree with me. There are lots of people clearly who agree with you.
There are just a lot of people, I would say, who are coming to listen to what I say because they're sick and tired of having their desire to move forward in the world, to achieve take their place as adult males, let's say, who are under the weight of accusations that their ambition and forthrightness is a manifestation of something that's fundamentally tyrannical. They're not happy with that. It's not doing anyone any good, and it's also not true. It's really a terrible thing to do to young men, and it's happening all the time. That's why they're bailing out of universities like mad. There won't be a man left in the social sciences in 10 years in the universities, and it's no bloody wonder. It's an unhospitable place, and it's unhospitable precisely because of this doctrine. Said that throughout history, the fundamental relationship between men and women was one of power, essentially slavery. It's like, fine, believe it if you want. It's not going to do your relationships any good, I can tell you that. So.
Okay, well, we'll see how that one goes. I'm currently married, but I'll raise it with him. I think the university's example is a really fascinating one because you talk in the book about the fact that now women are a majority on 2/3 of college courses in the US. And I've also seen you saying that you believe in equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome. Maybe
it isn't only that I don't believe in equality of outcome. I think it's an unbelievably pathological wish and doctrine.
Right,
it's very dangerous. History has demonstrated exactly how dangerous it is. Equality of opportunity is something that anyone with any sense would support, but equality of outcome.
So what's your problem with there not being
beyond belief to support equality of outcome?
Okay, so what's your problem with there not being enough men in the social sciences? Perhaps women are just cleverer. Perhaps that's why there are more women in university, right? Under your doctrine, I don't think that, but that's the logical extension of your doctrine.
Isn't the fact that there's an unequal distribution. The problem I have with it is that the reason that men are bailing out is because of the prevalence of the doctrine that you're espousing. That's the problem I have with it. It doesn't matter that much. They will bail out. I don't see any way that the universities are going to redeem themselves in the next decade. So, and maybe that will be fine, but I doubt it.
That seems extremely pessimistic when the numbers of people going to university just generally are going up.
Yeah, well, that's not going to last.
Why not?
Because it's too expensive, and the universities are doing all sorts of things that aren't acceptable. Mostly ratcheting up the price. So, and decreasing the quality of what they're offering, and playing into the hands of the people who are ideological acolytes of the identity politics routines, and playing postmodern stunts, and pushing neo-Marxism, and all these things that are characteristic of the social sciences and the humanities primarily.
See, this is where I find you fascinating to me, because you talk in these quite apocalyptic terms. I think that someone who will listen to that and think, wow, there's a really big problem. But what we're really talking about is some irritatingly postmodern professors and some students with blue hair and funny ideas about gender in a handful of courses around America
if that's
and
what we're
Western
talking about, no one would pay attention to you for more than about 15 minutes. So you might see this as some surface manifestation that's irrelevant, but that is not what people do. It's certainly the case, too, that this identity politics battle of ideas was a determining factor in the last American election. If Hillary wouldn't have played identity politics, played cozy with the identity politics type, she would have kept the working class and she would be president now. So these aren't trivial issues by any stretch of the imagination. It's not just some kids having a decent time while they're being creatively rebellious at university. It's a much deeper problem than that. The doctrines that I'm opposed to are predicated on, well, one assumption they're predicated on is probably the primary assumption is that the best way to view history is as the domination of a tyrannical male patriarchy. That's true also particularly in the West, which is a doctrine I find absolutely unpalatable and historically absurd, biologically ridiculous, and ungrateful, among other things.
Who's ungrateful, sorry, in that? Who is being ungrateful?
Look at what you have.
Right.
You live in the best society that's ever been created. I was reading about some Indonesians.
I mean, do you mean me as a woman or me as a 21st century person in the world?
I mean us, yeah.
I mean, I'm incredibly grateful for what I have, but to me the
Then how
project
is
of
it
politics
a
is...
construction of a tyrannical patriarchy? You're grateful for the productions of a tyrannical patriarchy. How does that make sense?
Because I think life is good, I think it could be better. That's what being
fine.
progressive means.
It's a perfectly reasonable proposition.
But I guess
that isn't commensurate with your claim that you're the beneficiary of the tyrannical patriarchy.
Why not?
How can it be good if it's the consequence of a tyrannical patriarchy? Tyranny isn't good, is it? I mean, that's the definition of tyranny. Something that isn't good. And yet it's produced all these things that you're grateful for. Like, doesn't that contradiction bother you? Where did what was good come from?
Well, I think I'm benefiting actually from a lot of things that I don't support, that are unearned privileges in my life. I think that's absolutely true.
Like your job?
Like I have a very good job, I had a loving family. I don't think that's going to do the world any good, is it?
That's a hell of a fine rationalization for your privileged position.
Oh, well, fair enough, but if
you could trade it off with someone who's less privileged.
I could.
That'd be a start.
I could do that, but I don't want to, and I won't, and I don't think I should be expected to.
Why not? Is it okay for you to occupy a position of privilege in the patriarchal tyranny? And if it is it because you're female, or is it just because it's convenient?
Let me tell you my political philosophy. I guess I'm a social democrat, so what I believe is that you should, if you have a good life, you should try and pass that on. I believe in a progressive redistributive tax system, for example. It was once said by Lord Mandelston in British politics, but New Labour was okay with people being filthy rich as long as they paid their taxes. Now, I'm kind of less okay with people being filthy rich.
Why filthy rich?
Well, I think I would leave that
You're probably in the top 1/10 of 1% of people who've ever lived on the planet. That would constitute filthy rich by historical standards.
Okay, but I'm not sure that
where is
I'm
the
going
line exactly?
to be able to help the Neanderthals at this point, really, by giving up some money. But this is my point, is that what I believe is, I believe in a structure in which people who have had a good life and had lots of advantages should pay that back, pay that forward, which I think is the message that you preach as well, right? You have responsibilities. And if you had, like us, a lot of advantages in life...
civilization as a tyrannical patriarchy.
It's not purely a tyrannical
That's
patriarchy,
for sure.
is it?
It's purely not.
Right.
And that's exactly the issue.
But why would
when
you
you
deal with
describe it as a
absolute
tyrannical patriarchy, then you make a case that it's purely that. And that's exactly what's ungrateful.
Why?
It's not purely that at all.
Why saying that something has elements of this makes you saying that it's purely that?
That isn't what's being said. Merely to define it as a patriarchy implies unidimensionality. And to insist that that's also tyrannical doesn't offer a balanced viewpoint at all.
Well, I think that's probably where your disagreement comes with this, which is because I do not see it in that way. I do not see that you there at all. I see it as one
Then why
element.
call it a patriarchy?
Because it describes an overarching structure.
Does it?
Yeah.
What if the patriarchy is fundamentally composed of women? Is it still a patriarchy?
No, that would be a matriarchy.
Would it? So let's say we take a patriarchal structure, like the medical profession, and we fill it primarily with women. Is it then a matriarchal structure? What makes it a patriarchy to begin with? Is it the hierarchical structure? Is it the fact that it's mostly men? Is it the sociological structure, or is it the fact that it's mostly men?
Well, I think that's really interesting because male primary school teachers, for example, only 15% of them are men, and I interviewed some of them for my book. And you know what? They report exactly the same things that women do in male-dominated offices, right? They say, people have conversations that I feel excluded from. I feel stigmatized, like I shouldn't be here. People look at me askance when I say I'm a primary school teacher and I'm a man. You know, they kind of reel back. We all make those implicit associations. So
if it is a structure that's dominated by women, then it's also a tyrannical patriarchy.
I think in that case, then men have a way of, they should be able to complain about the fact that a very female-dominated office leaves them feeling it too. Yeah, really being let down.
So how do we get something that isn't a tyrannical patriarchy? If it's composed of women, then it's a tyrannical patriarchy, and if it's composed of men, it's a tyrannical patriarchy. We're kind of out of options.
Right, but, well, or you can have a blend, an office in which a blend of people...
man!
So if it's 50-50, then it's not a tyrannical patriarchy.
No, not 50-50. I'm saying that people...
40-60.
I'm saying that so there is clearly, when there's only 15% of male primary school teachers, they do feel marginalised and excluded.
So you think the defining hallmark of a tyrannical social structure is the predominance of one gender? If that was relatively equalized, then all of a sudden it would be a free and open institution.
I don't think that male primary school teachers are being tyrannised. I do think they're being marginalised, and I do think that they feel excluded and stressed
so what do you do
by
about
that. Well, this is what I mean. I think actually, and I'm surprised you don't agree with me on this, that actually having more male primary school teachers would be a really good thing, because boys need role models, actually, particularly boys who don't have a father figure in their life. That's really important to have a stable adult who shows them what it's like to be a man around the place.
Could be, but you shouldn't achieve it as a consequence of preferential hiring.
No, I don't think it would necessarily need to be preferential hiring. I think it would probably be about making that job, breaking down the stigma to entering that job. I think teaching is a really interesting example. It was seen at the turn of...
when I was 18, 19.
Right.
There were no men in it.
And how did that make you feel?
I loved it.
Yeah.
You know, the kids, I used to wrestle with the kids, which of course you can't do now because everybody knows that would just be a catastrophe. And I used to draw them pictures of monsters and they'd line up for that. And I liked working with kids quite a lot. And I didn't care whether it was female-dominated. I've been female-dominated in my professions my whole life.
Right, I think...
I felt marginalised as a consequence.
Well then, you have been lucky, and I have talked to people who have the opposite.
I'd be careful in conduct as well.
Explain that more to me.
Well, why would you assume that it would be luck?
Well, if I say that, you know, there is a statistical analysis and I talk to a broad range of people, and, you know, you would always expect outliers at either end. Some people have had a really terrible time, some people have had a really brilliant time, everybody else in the middle.
One of the things that I strive to do is not to become resentful.
Well, okay, that's very good. I have to say that your Twitter feed does not give me that impression. You come across as somebody who takes criticism very much to heart. Is that true?
I don't think you have any grounds for that suggestion. You see my interviews online. If I was someone who took criticism at heart, I'd be in a lot more trouble than I am now.
In what way?
Well, I've been criticized endlessly for 2 years. I've been in scandals. I've probably been in, I don't know how many scandals in the last 2 years. And had unbelievably contentious interviews with journalists online, on TV, on radio, and podcasts. If I was someone who couldn't tolerate criticism, the evidence for that would already be clear. Twitter is a strange social network. I've kind of pulled myself away from it. So it's not an easy place to conduct yourself with as much grace as you might. And I think it rewards impulsivity because maybe it's because of the constraint on characters or something like that. So I think that people tend to show their worst on Twitter, and some of that's a consequence of the structure of the technology.
I think I certainly agree with you. I think that's something that we agree on there. I think people are rarely at their best on Twitter.
No, and you know, I pulled myself away from it quite a lot in the last month, mostly to see why. You know, I kind of kept an eye on Twitter, all the social media networks for the last few years, partly to see. Well, I'm trying to monitor what's happening around me, I suppose, is probably the right way of thinking about it, to see if I'm making mistakes and how they might be rectified. But I don't think Twitter's been good for me, and I don't think the reply function on Twitter is useful, and I think the fact that so many people on Twitter are anonymous is not a good thing at all.
Do you think you'd be less angry if you went on Twitter? That's something I think quite a lot. I would be come into contact with less things that annoyed me on a daily basis.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that. Yeah. I think that's definitely the case. And I've talked to other people who pulled back at Twitter and experienced the same thing. I don't know what it is exactly, but there's something about Twitter that seems to really heighten the desire of people to be provocative. And maybe it's the case that only people who are feeling irritable respond. We don't know, like if you put up a post and 1,000 people read it, certainly 1,000 people don't respond. A few people respond. Or maybe it skews way over to those people who had a bad day. Like we have no idea, right? Because it's a communication channel that no one understands. We're not evolved to understand it. We're not evolved to use it. We can't interpret it. Plus you're interacting with random strangers, which is something you never ever do. And it's never the same set of random strangers. You don't react to Twitter like it's random strangers. You react to Twitter like it's a person that you know. And it isn't.
You write in 12 Rules for Life about having had violent impulses that you didn't act on, and I think in Maps of Meaning you sort of elaborate on that. You say you fantasize about stabbing a classmate in the neck, and you're very clear about the fact that you never ever thought that you would take those seriously. But it just does make me think whether or not are you somebody who thrives on anger, who finds anger to be something that they need in their life, that they find motivates them to do the things that they need to do.
Those are two different questions.
Okay. You can answer them both.
One is whether I thrive on it, and the answer to that is most certainly not. So I actually don't like conflict.
Then how have you ended up doing this as a job? Which is arguing with people, right?
Just because that's not my job. It's not to argue with people.
Okay.
So my job is to not do things that I don't think I should do. Right, and my government made the mistake of assuming that compelled speech was acceptable as long as it was motivated by empathetical compassion. And that's not happened for me. So I made that point. It wasn't because I wanted to or because I enjoyed it. I don't really like conflict. I'm actually a rather agreeable person, which is partly why I'm a clinician. And so I find the constant conflict exhausting. But that's not the issue. I mean, you're not morally obligated. You're morally obligated to do things other than that which you like. So now I really do enjoy the lecture series that I'm doing. And the reason for that is that it's not political.
Come up if you want
in its essence. I'm trying to do everything I can to bring people who are trying to develop a vision for their life together and to encourage them to act more responsibly, but not
make me
in a
have to pee
finger-wagging
worse.
way. But because I've come to understand that the meaning that sustains you in life is mostly to be found through responsibility. And through the voluntary adoption of responsibility, you're very likely to find your fundamental strength. And I think that that's clinically unassailable observation. And that's all very good, and I'm very pleased to be doing it, but it seems to be having a salutary effect as far as I can tell. And but it's not because I thrive on anger. I mean, you were at my show,
on Thursday night, yeah.
How much anger was there in that?
Well, I thought it was fascinating because it was in Long Island. We drove to it and we went past a Lamborghini dealership, a Porsche dealership. It's not a poor area. The audience was, I would say, very, as I was surprised how many women there. It was pretty mixed. It was overwhelmingly white. And I thought you talked, you said at the end, I was more incoherent than I normally am. You ranged across quite a range of subjects from status in monkeys to perception, but the things that the crowd clapped and they applauded where you went, oh, you can't say that, that's a microaggression, or multiculturalism is a scourge that is sweeping Canada. And what I got was a strong sense...
that has swept Canada.
Okay, well, what I got was a very strong sense of people whose lives...
I never said that it was a scourge that swept Canada, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, well, I will go back and check your exact wording of what you said, but you definitely...
I'm not
damn, this bitch is stupid.
Right, okay,
but I don't think it's a scourge.
So I wonder if you and I mean the same thing when we talk about multiculturalism, because you have a First Nations room in your house, right? You have a lot of First Nations stuff. How is the coexistence of...
The honorary member of a First Nations family is
well, I have a First Nations artist from when I went to Canada last year, but that to me is the essence of Canadian multiculturalism, that culture being preserved and living alongside the Anglophone culture that in some senses supplanted it. How is that not multiculturalism?
Well, multiculturalism is the idea that the cultures can all be put together in a single place with an overarching structure or undergirding structures. Like, that's not the case. How can that possibly be the case? That defines the situation in the world. And the world is full of war. So how can that possibly work? If you're going to bring people together and they're going to exist together in harmony, they have to be playing a game that everyone plays, that everyone knows the rules for. It can't be 10 different sets of rules for different people. That isn't going to work. So it's absolutely naive to believe. How? If that worked, the world wouldn't be full of war.
Well, before we had, multiculturalism, we still did have war. In fact, war is, as Stephen Pinkerton, I'm sure you read what Stephen Pinkerton says, this is the least violent time in human history. So something
that's a consequence of patriarchal tyranny.
Well, if you think the patriarchy's been eroded over the last 100 years, maybe that's what it's down to. Maybe you could give some credit to it for that.
I actually didn't say that the patriarchy has been eroded.
Well, because you don't believe it exists in the first place, fair enough. But my definition of multiculturalism is citizenship-based, right? So you can be both Canadian and First Nations. You can be both Quebecois and also Canadian.
But that means that everybody in the multicultural milieu is one thing and another.
Right.
They're all one thing and another.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, our Prime Minister said, well, there is no Canadian identity. It's like,
Cheer up, Your Majesty. It might never happen.
Well, nothing. We all protect our cultures. It's like, well, that leads to war.
Okay,
that doesn't only lead to war, obviously.
Lord
but
Rab,
unless you have
and your friends
operating
too.
within a shared
I'm so
framework
happy
of
to see
perception
you
and value,
safe
they
and
can't
well.
cooperate and compete.
Aye, the feeling's very much mutual. Lots happened since last we met.
Indeed. Yggdrasil has
That's how you
fallen.
organize people.
The
Okay,
world has been
I
covered
think
in
if that's what he said,
darkness.
that's what Trudeau said, that is a dumb
Gold
thing for the
fever
Prime Minister of Canada to
ravages
say
my-
when you are Prime Minister
What's
of
that
Canada.
now?
Yeah, you might say
I would
that.
agree much more with what Barack Obama said when he said, I'm trying not to
There
make
is.
a red states
It
America or
all
blue states
began
America,
a
white
few
America, black
weeks
America, I'm
ago,
trying to
you
make
see.
United States
A
America. That to me
Yes,
is
the
strange
Democrats
disease
have done
started to
Well,
spread across
they
Niflheim.
tried.
It affects people, animals, even plants. Anyone or anything that catches it
So he can
turns
say that, but it
entirely
isn't obvious
to
that it's
gold.
the case. And it's not obvious to me at all that one of the consequences of Barack Obama's
We don't
presidency
know
was a
what
reduction in
causes it,
racial tension
or
in the
how
United
to
States.
cure it.
No, I wouldn't
So
agree with that either. I
every
think a lot
one
of
of
people
my
found
poor
having a black
subjects
college
lives
education
in
profession
fear
very
of being
alarming
struck.
and threatening
I
to their
tried to send
ideas
for
themselves as
help.
the dominant group.
Every route out of the kingdom is blocked by great
No, that is
golden
very true, but
obstacles.
again,
It's fundamentally true.
My
right?
dear
It's
friend
really a crucial issue
Kristalinda
at
was
hand.
studying
no, but he built a big
these to try
coalition
to
of
find a
white,
cure.
well-educated liberals
But in
and
their
people of
panic,
colour. I mean,
my
that is the
people
Democrat
suspected her
electorate.
of spreading it instead. For her own
Well, I think
safety,
it's
I
caused by a
was
lot of things,
forced
not
to
one
lock
least of
her
one of
away
which is the
in the
Republican Party
dungeon.
inflaming
I
it.
have
You talk
tried
about
to
the
tell
left
my
playing identity
subjects
politics.
she's
I think the right
innocent.
play identity politics all the time.
There, Your Majesty. Then he looks
No,
like
but it dominates. But Donald
We'll
Trump
get
is
to the
president,
bottom of
so
this.
realistically,
Donald Trump is hardly a typical Republican.
Oh,
no, I
thank
used to say that
you.
he accomplished
most
You
that.
of-
are
most of his
always
life,
so
Democrat,
very
Democrat,
kind to me.
Democrat.
Right, I don't think he has any
So we're not
political
going to blame Donald Trump
allegiance
all
to.
right way.
Okay, but I'm going to say the rest of the
Everybody in the
Republican
city
Party
know
are
that
also
you
quite
are
happy to
here
play.
to
I would say
help,
white identity
and that they
politics.
must help
They
you
did
in
not
town.
dump him as their candidate when he said
Take
Mexicans,
care,
they're not sending us
dear
their best people here, they're rapists, right? The whole idea of the United States, it said, I think a beautiful thing, all men are created equal, but it meant men, and it meant specifically white men.
My
Women
God.
and black people could not vote. The US was founded on identity politics. This is not some new concept that has come along in the last 20 years.
The United States wasn't founded on identity.
Yes, it was.
That's an absolutely absurd proposition. The United States was founded on the same principles that, what would you say, that played their powerful role through the development of English democracy. And that was nested inside a Judeo-Christian view that fundamentally presumed that both men and women were made in the image of God and that all people had divine value. And it took a long time for that set of ideas to fully manifest itself in the political realm. But to consider that a manifestation of identity politics is, I can't imagine why you would possibly do that.
I don't consider that a manifestation of identity politics. I consider having a constitution that says only some people are citizens to be a manifestation of identity politics.
Well, what do you think changed it across time? And look, let's get our definitions straight here. You can't lump all occurrences of non-equal treatment into the category of identity politics. Identity politics is a very specific thing. It's really only existed since the 1970s. You can't go back to 1770 and say that the founders of the American Constitution were playing identity politics.
They were playing politics that was based on identity. That's my definition of identity
that's
politics.
not the definition of identity politics unless you play fast and loose with the definition. Identity politics is something that's in... No one talked about identity politics 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It's a new term. You can't say that people's proclivity to identify with their group is identity politics. That's just tribalism. And that's like, who knows how old that is? 1 million years old. 500,000 years old. And you're going to call tribalism identity politics? Well, that's not helpful. If you want to talk about tribalism, we can talk about tribalism. But identity politics is something that's nested inside a particular political view of the world. It's got a Marxist basis, and it manifests itself in postmodernism. And it emerged in the American Union, France first in the 1970s, and then has swept through the American universities, and increasingly the rest of the West since then. That's identity politics. If you want to talk about tribalism, that's fine. I'm not a fan of tribalism, which is why I don't like the identity politics types. And I don't care if they're on the right or the left. I think the right-wing use of identity as the primary marker for human categorization is as reprehensible and dangerous as it is on the left. My problem with the left at the moment, the fundamental problem with the radical left, is that they're hyper-dominant in academia. And that's not good. And that's not my opinion. You can go look at Jonathan Haidt's dad and see for yourself. And he's as modern a person as you can hope to find. And probably less prone to anger than me.
And I agree with you. I find a lot of students phenomenally irritating, but I would question how much power they have in contrast to the things that I find more worrying that are happening in the world today, right? Or even the professors, right? Even
the 20-year-olds don't have that much power, but they're not 20 forever. 10 years later, they're 30. And 20 years later, they're 40.
Right.
And whatever happens in the university happens everywhere 5 years later.
And very, very sadly for people in my politics, left-wing politics, what happens to people as they get older is that they traditionally got more conservative. So I don't think you can make a case that the current, where people are in their 20s today is actually going to be the ideology that takes them all the way through their life. That's never been the case
but
so far.
It'll be around long enough to do plenty of damage, like it already is.
Okay, but even if we accept that students and their POMO professors are quite annoying, which I think is probably something I agree with.
They're not just annoying. Like, they're destroying the universities, and that's not a good thing. And they're particularly destroying the social sciences and the humanities. The sciences are safe so far, but not for long, because the scientists in particular are terrible at politics, and the left-wing activists are great at politics. And so they'll win eventually. In the National Science Foundation, there are hardly any mathematical geniuses. You start putting all sorts of arbitrary restrictions on their hiring, you're going to end up not finding the ones that there are. So, besides,
I don't think that's true actually, because if you say there are very few mathematical geniuses. Well, next year I'm going to be a fellow at Oxford University, so I spend time talking to academics. I've talked to a lot of academics for my book. I do agree with you, there is an illiberal strain that is sweeping through a lot of universities. I don't think it's an existential threat, and I certainly don't think it is, to me, the biggest issue in world politics today. It's the one that I would choose personally.
What do you think is the biggest issue?
I think that the rise of strongmen, authoritarians around the world is very worrying, and that's one of the reasons that I find the subtitle of your book fascinating, because it's called An Antidote to Chaos. Why isn't it an antidote to order, which you also say in its excessive manifestation?
Oh, there you are. Is everything all right?
Well, you can't write a book about everything.
No, but you've specifically chosen Antidote to Chaos, so why is chaos...
300 lectures online, and I talk plenty about the pathology of order in those lectures.
Okay, but I'm just
saying...
saying...
fan of authoritarian strongmen, that's for sure.
Well, that's good, but I do think that the way that you talk about order in the book is something that people will take away from it.
Be specific.
Okay, so let me think. The way that you talk about natural dominance hierarchies and lobsters. Let's get on to the lobsters. Because I think that the thing that people take away from that is male lobsters compete for female lobsters, and that says something about society now, that men need to be dominant in society. Because if lobsters do it, then there is something we can read about humans.
There's nothing in that chapter at all that suggests that the way that men should succeed in human hierarchies is a consequence of the exercise of power. There's not one line in that entire book that claims that, because it's not what I believe. Most human hierarchies, as I already pointed out, are hierarchies of competence, not power.
Okay, so
that's why we don't live in a patriarchal tyranny. And so if you want to be a successful man, then you should be competent. And that will move you up the hierarchy, and that will make you attractive, and for good reason, unless you want an incompetent mate, which is possible. and happens, but isn't something that I would recommend. People will sometimes choose an incompetent mate because they're intimidated by confidence, and so they'll settle for someone who they don't respect because they feel that they can master them and they won't.
Not exactly.
But it's not a recipe for
You
a
see,
happy life, I can tell you that. So there isn't a line in that chapter that talks about power as the proper means of conducting yourself in life. There's not a line in the book, and there's nothing in anything I've ever said that suggests that.
Do you have a minute to talk to us? We'd like to ask you a few questions.
Do I have a minute, he asks?
It's a misapprehension.
How can I know
So,
when
it's a
every
misapprehension.
second might...
Okay, but if so many people are getting the same misapprehension, could it be
There are
possible?
so many people
I
that are getting
know
it. There's 2 million people
You're
that have
that
bought the
boy,
book, and there's a very
Eric.
small handful of people who have a particular ideological perspective who enjoy
you know
developing
me?
that perspective because it indicates just what sort of reprehensible individual
don't
I
be
am.
silly.
But it has absolutely nothing to do
Everyone
with
in
what I wrote, or
Sniffelheim
what I've
knows
said,
you.
or what I believe.
You're
I don't
the...
believe that our fundamental hierarchies are based on power. I don't believe that the way that you move up our hierarchies is as a consequence of manifesting power. It's
happening.
competence.
Okay, my big problem with the lobsters
What's the matter,
is that
dear?
it's scientifically bollocks. Right? It's just, you cannot read across from lobsters what they do to what humans do.
That's why serotonin works on lobsters.
But it works in 2 different ways. So if serotonin makes lobsters more aggressive,
No, it makes them
less
more dominant.
aggressive. Right? That's
No,
what happens.
that's not right.
That's
Serotonin makes human beings more dominant but less aggressive. And the only reason it makes them more dominant is
I
because
take
they're
it
less
this is a case of
irritable,
gold
they're less
fever.
aggressive. So it's not bollocks. I know my neurochemistry. So if you're going to play neurochemistry, let's go and do it.
Okay, we'll use the antidepressants work on lobsters.
Are you okay?
It will make a lobster that's been defeated in a fight more likely to fight again.
That's not the same mechanism that happens in humans.
Yes, it is.
Lobsters
It's
don't
the same
get depressed
Do you know our
as the way
friend
humans do.
Frank?
I think you're
He's an old
anthropomorphizing
pal
into
of ours, but we lost him
These are
after
creatures
the
that urinate out of their faces.
I think that the fundamental
poor
issue
child.
of knowledgeable animal
Perhaps I can help
behaviors
to
is
jog
that
your friend's memory.
anthropomorphization with animals is generally the appropriate tactic unless you have reason to doubt it, which is because there's continuity between us and animals rather than discontinuity. And the idea that the anthropomorphization of animals is inappropriate is something derived from 1950s behaviorism. The highly trained affective neuroscientists and people who study motivation and emotion as well as neurochemistry know perfectly well that there is biological and behavioral continuity across the animal kingdom and way down into the kingdom as well, which is exactly why I chose lobsters, to indicate that there is so much continuity in the systems that allow us to estimate a status position that we share it with creatures that are 1/3 of a billion years old. And the reason that I made that argument was to put paid at least in part to the absurd Marxist proposition that hierarchical structures are a secondary consequence of Western civilization and free market economies, which is as preposterous a perspective as you could possibly develop about anything. Hierarchies are 1/3 of a billion years old. You can't blame them on the West or men or capitalism. And we're wired for hierarchical perception in ways that you can hardly possibly imagine. Even our ability to rank order a set of objects seems to be tightly linked to our ability to assess the relative status of people in our social milieus. So, and the biochemistry is very, very similar. And the reason we know that is because most of the drugs that are used on people are first tested on animals. Now, it's not often animals as primitive as lobsters, but it is plenty. So a lot of what we know about neurological structure, for example, is a consequence of studying the flatworm, which is a much more primitive organism than the lobster. Continuity is the rule.
Okay, so what can we learn from killer whales that live in matriarchal pods, often led by a grandmother, someone who's been through a menopause? Why isn't that an example that you picked to talk about in the book? It's because lobsters say the thing that ideologically you want to talk about, which is your belief that there is a kind of Marxist ideology.
How do lobsters say that? The point that I was making with lobsters, I just said what it was. That hierarchies have been around for a very
But who
long time.
genuinely, really, today is arguing, apart from maybe 3 mad Marxist academics, that there is no such thing as hierarchy? Hierarchies.
They're not arguing that there's no such thing as hierarchy.
Or there should be no
arguing
such thing
that-
as hierarchies.
Oh, there are plenty of them are arguing that.
Really? Because I see that almost never in the wild as an argument. I see people think that hierarchy should be based on merit and they should be more
What do you
equal.
think the demand for equality of outcome is if it's not an attempt to flatten hierarchies or to eliminate them? What else could it possibly be? And you don't think the neo-Marxists and the postmodernists think that hierarchy is a social construction? Like, you're not talking about the same people that I know. That's for sure. Everything's a social construction for the social constructionists, including hierarchies.
But I just don't think that is a very widely held view in the world. It might be among liberal arts universities.
20% of social scientists identify as Marxist.
Where's that statistic from?
Look it up in Height's work.
Okay. I'm interested.
I've checked it out quite carefully.
Yeah, but
it's a perfectly valid statistic. I don't have the reference at hand.
Yeah.
So it's 1 in 5. And the number of conservatives, or even liberals for that matter, in the social sciences and humanities is not only vanishingly small, but getting smaller. And you think the social constructionists believe that hierarchy is built into biology? They're not very good social constructionists if that's what they believe. And the postmodernists and the neo-Marxists are radical social constructionists because they wouldn't believe that human beings are infinitely malleable and that we can be recreated in whatever image the ideologues might want to recreate us in if they didn't think that. And it's much more prevalent than you're admitting. I mean, there isn't a competing position on campuses except among the evolutionary biologists and the evolutionary psychologists, let's say, and they're under complete attack. They're certainly next on the chopping block as far as I can tell. I've been warning them for the last 2 years. Social constructionists don't like evolutionary psychologists and they don't like biology. And I really don't understand why, except that it interferes with this idea that human beings are infinitely malleable and stops them from being able to blame hierarchy on the West. Look, if you're really concerned about the poor, as a social democrat, let's say, the first thing you should do is abandon your presupposition that dispossession produced by hierarchies is a consequence of the patriarchal structure of the West. It's a way deeper problem than that. So there have been people who've been dispossessed forever, way before capitalism.
Okay, I think I would agree with that. So if it is a way deeper problem than that, how do you tackle it?
I don't know.
Well, that's a bit... I mean, that, for someone as intelligent as you that just throw their hands up and go, maybe some people...
There's lots of things I don't know how to tackle. I don't know how to tackle the fact that people range extremely widely in their cognitive ability either. These are big problems.
Right, but we could start with a redistributed tax policy, right, where people who earn a lot pay more tax than people lower down the income scale to redistribute income. That was a fairly obvious way that you could make poor people less poor. It's something that, the Labour government did. They almost... I think they halve child poverty. It is possible to do things, and we do have mechanisms.
Well, I wouldn't make the immediate presumption that it was the redistributive tax policy that halved child poverty. That absolute poverty in the world is halved between the year 2000 and 2012, and you can't attribute that to redistributive policies.
No, I can't. I'm only talking about Britain. I'm talking about that particular government, which had, then there are fiscal analyses that have been done. But I think let's move on from lobsters. I mean,
That chapter is about people becoming responsible and competent, not about them becoming dominant and powerful.
Okay,
it's not that at all.
But my problem is, I think you got criticised by a lot of marine biologists, right, and by a lot of geneticists.
I think
for
one.
Okay, well, I can name you. P.Z. Myers is one who's criticised you. Adam Rutherford, who's former editor of Nature, has criticised that chapter. There are, that is not. But what I think is fascinating is that
biologists dispute the fact that most organisms organize themselves into hierarchies, and that the fundamental biological mechanism for the regulation of hierarchy is the serotonin system. That's not disputable. Now you can find animal organizational structures that vary from that, what would you call it, fundamental pattern. But the existence of variance isn't proof against the existence of a fundamental pattern. I don't know how you can sit there and be skeptical about this. If you know the literature on hierarchical structure, you understand that across the entire animal kingdom, animals tend to organize themselves into hierarchies. And that the neurochemistry
very different types of hierarchies, right? So
there's a pattern. That's why we know they're hierarchies.
Yeah, but you say the pattern as if that's
the hierarchy is the pattern.
Right. Okay, and that's fine. So chimps have one very obvious social structure, and bonobos have another.
It's not
one.
as different as people have made it out to be. The bonobos are a lot more violent than the
and they're not hippie monkeys, right?
Observers of the bonobos have admitted.
Okay, but nonetheless, you say that as if those little details don't matter, as if there can't be such a thing as a hierarchy that's much worse than another hierarchy. That's my problem.
I'm not saying that at all. There's clearly hierarchies that are worse than other hierarchies.
Right.
Baboons have terrible hierarchies, for example.
And
tyrannical hierarchies aren't my cup of tea.
Right.
That isn't the point I was making. The point I was making was that hierarchies can't be blamed on capitalism or the West. They're built into our biology. The neurochemistry is so old that we share it with crustaceans, so that's 1/3 of a billion years, which is the proof that hierarchies aren't a recent construct. proof like that needs to be needed, needs to be provided, and that the best way for people to adopt a strategy that will move them up the hierarchy, which is a desirable thing in most regards, is to face the suffering of the world forthright. That's what that chapter is about. And the people who've been criticizing it read it as if it's a defense of the Western patriarchy. It's like there's no defense of the Western patriarchy.
I don't think that's true. I think the way that people criticize it is, and I think this happens a lot with evolutionary psychology, is which is not quite what the lobsters are, but is where other stuff in the book is. Other things you said, for example, like women wear rouge because it reminds men of ripe fruit. Right, well, for a start...
What do you think women wear rouge?
I have absolutely no idea, but I will tell you...
That's really not a very good answer.
Well, yeah, you said before that lots of things you don't know the answer to. But I'll tell you one thing.
I'm not criticizing your perspective on this, you're criticizing mine, so I'm presuming an alternative idea. What? Women? Why do you think women wear makeup?
I think there are an enormous number. Let's go back to why women wear rouge, because it reminds men of ripe fruit. Okay, first of all, not all ripe fruit is red.
God, man.
Why would you want to? Do you want
color vision to detect ripe fruit?
Do you want to eat women? No. I think unless men are having sex with ripe fruit, that's not really what. And where is the evidence that women who are redder in the cheeks have more offspring?
What do you think happens during the sexual flush?
But that's the key point, isn't it? Is that you would expect, actually, if this is a sexual selection, that women who are redder would have more children.
One of the hallmarks of youthful skin is the proclivity for it to flush red. And yes, youthful women have more children. It's a primary sign of fertility.
I think
wait a second here. What do you think women wear makeup for? Come on, if you're going to go after me on this,
okay.
Let's women. People say, well, women wear makeup to feel better about themselves. It's not a very deep analysis. Why makeup? Why facial makeup?
I'll tell you why I wear makeup, which is to stop the comments that I would get if I didn't wear makeup. And my gender, I always say my gender is low maintenance, right? I don't feel particularly like a woman inside. I don't really know what that would mean. But what I try and do is try and look, in the same way that you get black women who talk about the problem with natural hair, is it's seen as unprofessional, right? And as a woman, if you don't wear makeup, that is seen as a political choice. That is seen as something that, you are...
So you wear makeup to protect yourself from what? From tyrannical men?
No, but tyrannical women as well, I would say. I think women very harshly judge each other's appearance, and there are very good reasons for that.
But probably because they've learned that from oppressive men.
No, I don't think so.
Why do you think it is, then?
I think that women are encouraged to be seen as being in competition with each other.
Encouraged? You don't think that there's anything about that that's natural?
Well, I would be reluctant to get into that, because I think if you talk about intrasexual competition, I think that's a very big deal among the social sciences and evolutionary science. It's not my particular competence. But yeah, I wouldn't. My conception of the patriarchy is not that men are beastly to women. It is that there is a structure in which women participate to that overall privileges and benefits men in order to control female reproduction. And I think those are two very different things. You write in 12 Rules that you skipped a grade in school and you were small for your age. Do you think that shaped your personality and your experiences of life?
Well, it did to some degree. It made it difficult for me to participate in sports. So I didn't really do anything that was fundamental until I was in graduate school. So my parents are guilty about that because they felt that it wasn't good for me, but I'm not unhappy about it. I got through school faster. I wasn't a fan of school, and the faster I got through it, the better. I think it might have encouraged me to do two other things, which was I probably hung around with rougher kids than I might have otherwise, as a compensation, I suppose, for being smart and academically able and also small. So I probably exaggerated my roughness, I suppose, and it made me more capable of verbally defending myself. But other than that, I don't think it had much of an effect. I think I pretty much left all of that behind.
That's very good. Also, the other thing I was really interested in was that you married your teenage sweetheart.
Yeah, well, I met her when I was 8. So we've known each other for 50 years.
So this is, I think, really fascinating. So I read that and I thought that was quite moving. And then I was reading the bit about, the animal kingdom, and the bit we take away from the lobster section is that, what happens if you're top lobster is that you get to impregnate all the females as being evolutionarily successful as a lobster, right?
There's proclivity towards polygamy, which is one of the things that pulls on human society.
Right, and you're now the pretty big lobster, and yet you are monogamous, you're faithful to your wife, you don't want to go around impregnating every woman that you see, right?
No, one woman's enough trouble.
Right, so I think that's really, to me that was really interesting because that's a way in which we are very obviously very different from animal society, and to me it takes...
We're not that different. I mean, there are plenty of societies where exactly that happens.
Right, but you've been able to overcome that biological urge, right? And so in the sense that maybe there are other biological urges, such as men's propensity towards violence, that might also be overcome.
Well, it's not self-evident that you want it to be overcome. I mean, you don't know what goes along with it. Obviously, first of all, defining violence isn't that straightforward. How about use of force in self-defense? Does that constitute violence?
I think to me that's a separate category.
Well, but it's not that easy to distinguish them. Like if you're, what you want to do with a child who's aggressive is socialize them so that they become sophisticated in their manifestation of their aggression. You don't want to inhibit it. You certainly don't want to socialize little boys to be more like little girls. That's, first of all, you don't know how to do it to begin with, but second of all, it's not very, it's not an advisable
there
strategy.
You are. I am glad to see you safe and well,
really
Eric.
Interesting, because in the book you say that if you feminise men, that might give them more of a, might have more of an allure towards, these very fascist
there's no doubt
ideologies.
about that. That's standard psychoanalytic. That's like psychoanalysis 101.
Not
if you repress something, it comes back with a vengeance.
The Viking raiders who once roamed the northern...
Because to me, if you don't mind me saying so, you are a man who's quite feminine. You're in touch with your feminine side. You are very well dressed. You talk a lot about your diet. You've talked about your
emotions.
So
that is why the men I sent to scour Heliodor for details of your origin will always return empty-handed.
Kids, all of these things that are
not
sad, isn't it?
But Eric and his younger sister were orphans. Very admirable.
Pretty strange behavior for a patriarchal tyrant.
Well, that's why I think that you probably, in some ways, are not a patriarchal tyrant.
Whether that
all
was
of our
for good or
programming,
bad,
if you want to call it that,
I really couldn't say.
It's overcomeable because
by all accounts, then one day
right, but you are a man
we
who
heard
some people
rumors
say has a
that
lot of
Eric's
feminine
sister
traits like that, and I
had
don't.
passed away.
Do you think that means that you are now feeling the allure of authoritarian, fascistic ideology?
It has always saddened me that I was not able to help those poor children more.
And then what do you do with that?
I said stop!
Work to live such that there's no
to be alone for a while.
Which is also what I recommend to everyone else.
Right.
If you see any temptation in that, then you should straighten yourself up real quick.
Forgive me.
That's what I've
it
done.
Was tactless of me to reveal so much so soon.
Of course you have to see the
Please,
allure in that. If
go
you don't
to
see
your
the allure
friend.
in it, you're a fool.
I will join.
If you don't see the allure in the radical leftist ideas. I mean, if you didn't understand the allure, you couldn't understand the ideas. They're dangerously alluring. It'd be lovely if there was a strong man who could solve all our problems, and those who deserved it got exactly what was coming to them. It's not something that I would recommend as a wish. But that doesn't mean you want to be blind to its attraction. You want to see what the dark parts of you are attracted to. It helps you keep an eye on where things can go if they go badly sideways. So, I don't think it has anything to do, though, with my what would you say, more classically feminine interests. Not as far as I can tell. I mean, I have all sorts of classically masculine interests too, so
right, and
it seems to be reasonably well balanced.
Right, so you're talking then about you shouldn't socialise little boys like little girls, but actually, I have lots of stereotypes. I'm interested in politics, which is overwhelmingly male-dominated. You have lots of classically feminine interests. Why, what is the problem here with people having personalities that are a mixture?
There's no problem with that at all. The problem is when it's dictated by fiat.
Well, who's fiat?
How about the education system?
So, in schools, you think, that there is the...
Well, I can't remember the psychologist's name at the moment, but he was quite influential in the 1980s, who recommended as a control for male violence that boys be socialized more like little girls. And I don't think that that's a particularly unpopular viewpoint. So the de-emphasis on competition, for example, in games, the increase in
I'm sorry I ran off
rise
like
of
that.
competitive games where scores aren't kept, that sort of thing, is all a manifestation of that kind of theory as far as I'm concerned. The idea that there's something intrinsically wrong with competition. It's a very foolish idea, especially if you want to motivate relatively aggressive boys, because they're competitive. Competition, that's not good. Someone has to lose. So, you're not going to get very far in the world that way, I'm afraid. Maybe you want to generate a plethora of games so that everybody has a shot at winning. That's a good idea. But you certainly don't want to value the notion of winning. If you're doing something necessary, you should reward people who are particularly good at it. It's part of the definition of it being necessary. So, and you don't want to control aggression any more than you want to control sex. You want to integrate it. And if it's integrated, that's the integration of the shadow from the Jungian perspective. It's something I talk about in my lectures. It's like you need to have the capacity for danger. You need to be dangerous. But you need to learn how to not use it except when it's necessary. That is not the same as being harmless. Harmless, that's a terrible virtue. It's like a rabbit. There's nothing virtuous about harmlessness. It just means you're ineffectual.
That ship, if the townspeople's shouts are anything to go by, it is not a welcome sight.
He's not harmless. He just transcended his deep violence. That is a completely different thing. Without that capacity, there would have been no
I will take care of Eric. Please, you must hurry to the harbor.
He's an integrated person, not a harmless person. That's very, very different.
Did you have different ambitions for your daughter and for your son?
Some of them were different. I encouraged my daughter to desire to be a mother, which is not something I did with my son.
Did you encourage him to desire to be a father?
Absolutely.
Empty your pockets, nibbling the sniffelheimers.
Right, but those are different.
Time to pay tribute to the great and glorious
in some sense, I think it's harder.
Come on, you glittering curs, let's get to work. Grab the golden statue.
It's a more complex problem to solve. About how she might solve that. I wouldn't say that we came up with anything that was spectacularly original or successful, but I at least let her know that whatever pathway she chose was fine with me if she, as long as she was being honest with herself about what it was that she wanted. But also that, I'm not a fan of the idea that the most fundamental orientation that a person is likely to have in life is career. I don't believe that's true for most people. I certainly don't believe it's true for most women. And I think the evidence supports that quite straightforwardly. So,
however, it is the only thing that you get paid for under capitalism. Right? But that's
how can I say something like that? It's so cliche. It's so painful to hear that.
Maybe because you didn't know the rest of the time, right? Women do more.
It's not capitalism. Well, for God's sake.
It is.
No, it isn't. You have to invest into a child for 18 years before they have any economic utility.
The monsters are making away with the people who turned to gold. Could the fever be...
monetize it. It's not a consequence of capitalism. It's a consequence of the fact that human beings have an 18-year dependency.
Cease your
How do you
boastful
monetize
blustering,
that?
fiend.
Even in principle. Well,
You
we don't
dare to...
know.
We did used to send them up chimneys, to be fair, and at that point, what's really interesting is at that point, children were seen as being much more the property of the man, and as become economically useless on the legal sense. But that then started into the model of female custody, right? It's about caring for them. But this is the point I'm making.
Look, I'll tell you, there are plenty of men who are not very happy about the model of female custody. And that would include the, 85% of men who are essentially denied 50-50 custody when they divorce and have young children. So I wouldn't think that one of our major problems, or at least a major unidimensional problem, is the proclivity of men to foist off the custody of their children on women. There's certainly another side of that argument.
There is, and I do think that actually a lot of anger has been generated
Let's make your blood run cold!
Fault-based divorces, that's something that's changing. We want to encourage people to come in on day one and say, if you want to get divorced, you're going to have to make that.
It doesn't matter if you move to a non-fault-based divorce system, then all that happens is the fault shifts to who should get custody. It doesn't involve the acrimony by extension of the imagination, it just shifts it to custody.
Right, well in Britain we actually talk about access rather than custody because it's the idea of not own to see the children spend time. That's really important. But fault-based divorce is something that increases the chances of couples having a bad divorce, right? That's the point. They have to go to court and protest something wrong, which is not a great basis to start an argument about
So you could
No, I think that having to prove that before the door is not something that is going to lead you to a better arbitration money access to children. And that's the point. You have a ridiculous situation where couples who say, well actually just grown apart, nonetheless, unless they want to wait 5 years for separation, restaurant. They have to go in and look for something to get a golden shot. That's the joy of menopause, of course, is that you don't have to make this decision. You can simply say, I'm ready to work. I can't wait for that. And it's all of that. It's quite sensible to me.
Well, I've seen very few non-divorces. They're very hard on kids. So I don't think anything that makes them easier is a very good idea. It might be good in the short term, but it's not good in the long term. Unless you don't think that marriage is a useful institution. And if you think that it's part of the patriarchy.
Their companions are fleeing.
So, it's a very useful institution, mostly for kids.
Over there.
I agree that I'm married. Modern marriage has a lot to recommend it. I do also think it is a patriarchal institution. It is literally...
Eric! They've got Eric!
Well,
Oh my God! Help! Never mind why. They must be...
It's easy to think that because then you only have to think one thing. One thing answer for everything. That's part of the patriarchal institution.
I don't think you're obeying a rule that says maybe treat people as if they have something worth hearing, so...
I'm not
we are getting that boy back and we are doing it right
now. I
now.
don't think you are either. I think that you're making a case that's like a universally cliched case for the patriarchal tyranny.
Why do women change their names? Why do women change their names on marriage traditionally?
I don't know exactly. Why do you think they do?
Because it was to symbolise the transfer of their ownership from one family to another family. That's why in The Handmaid's Tale you have Off-Warren and
Off-Glenn. Margaret Atwood. Well, she was just about devoured by the feminists last year, so that was something interesting to observe.
I think she made a very good... She wasn't devoured by all feminists. I'm a feminist. I thought what she said about due process in cases like that is perfectly reasonable.
Well, many people didn't.
No, but then, guess what? On the internet you can find someone who disagrees with pretty much anything. But so why do you think women change their names when they get married traditionally? If it's not about transfer of property ownership traditionally?
I don't know if I have an opinion about that. The specific reasons for that, I'd have to look into it for a fair amount of time before I decided it, but I certainly wouldn't boil it down to a unidimensional argument about the ownership of women by men. So,
okay.
I mean, the part of the problem too is with this sort of discussion is that it's, and this is why I consider it a manifestation of ideological possession. It's predictable.
Well, that's what
knowing your stance on...
But having a coherent ideology does mean that it is predictable because
you don't need an ideology.
It is one logical thing that flows from another and that all those pieces tessellate together. So what I find very interesting about your thinking, I find it quite slightly baffling, is that I don't really see how all the pieces fit together. You say that you're not, you believe in God, but there's a lot of emphasis about going back to...
No, I actually say I act as if God exists.
Right. But,
which is actually my definition of belief.
Okay, but that then doesn't, to me, tessellate very obviously with your insistence that actually it's just about pure science and there's not because I can
what insistence that it's just about pure science?
Well,
I wrote Maps of Meaning. There's no insistence in that it's just about pure science.
Okay, but you make appeals to science.
Different.
You make appeals to science all the time. You say, well, this is what the literature says, and the trouble with God is that ultimately you can't say this is what the literature says. There is no literature.
Which is why I don't say anything about the scientific status of God, apart from what can be experienced maybe under certain conditions.
I am sorry that the creatures found us,
and I was to be something that you can say something.
Please, do not be so hard on yourself. When we heard that you were outside the gates when the monsters attacked,
and in the realm of facts, science reigns supreme. But it doesn't in the realm of values. You have to look elsewhere. That was what the humanities were for.
They have run away. They just picked them up and carried them off like so much plunder.
And the idea that
to sell our friends, our families,
should be consistent. You were talking about.
But then why would they take Eric? He had no valuables in his possession, and he was not afflicted by the fever. And
how you're able to represent the ideology you were taught.
It is
and it's not that
as
interesting because I don't know anything about you. I could replace you with someone else who thinks the same way, and that means you're not here.
The ship they sailed in.
It's not pleasant.
Could they be?
So you're not drawing. You're not integrating the specifics of your personal experience with what you've been taught to synthesize something that's genuine and surprising and engaging in a narrative sense as a consequence. And that's the pathology of ideological possession.
They may look different, but
and
we
it's
know
not good that I know where you stand
very well
once I know a few things. It's like, why have a conversation? I already know where you stand on things.
I think you don't know where I stand on all things.
I would hope that was true.
Okay, let's talk about transgender
They
issues.
were
That's fine. What do you think I think about transgender
used
issues?
to have a hideout near here, in a little cave just around
I
the
suspect
headland.
that you think that
I think that is
gender
where they have
expression,
taken your
gender
friend.
identity are fundamentally social constructs, but I could be wrong.
No, I believe that there are definitely some biological differences between the sexes. We've observed them. I do believe that gender is a hugely powerful social structure that we've built on top of that, and it is largely, but not entirely, socially constructed. I think when you look back through the history, biological differences have consistently shrunk, like we were talking in the 80s.
We haven't in Scandinavia, they've magnified.
Okay, but we were talking in the 80s.
That's actually an important exception, because Scandinavia has gone farther than any other area, the Scandinavian countries, in establishing egalitarian social policy. And the differences in interest and career choice and personality between men and women have grown as a consequence, not shrunk. Which is exactly the opposite of what the social constructionists predict.
But those would just suggest that they're malleable, actually, rather than fixed.
Well, of course they're malleable. No one would ever suggest otherwise.
Right. So that's what I mean. So I
but
think
they're not malleable in the direction that the social constructionists presume, as you flatten out the sociological landscape and maximize the biological differences. No one saw that coming. And you might think, well, it's a handful of right-wing scientists who are pushing that. It's like, no, it's not. It's mainstream psychology, and there aren't any radical right-wingers in mainstream psychology. And everyone who discovered that was absolutely shocked by it. And these papers have been cited by thousands of people, and they have tens of thousands of subjects that have been done on virtually national level samples, cross-cultural.
But I also think the behaviour in Scandinavia has changed. For example, a lot more men take paternity leave now that there is a portion that is reserved purely for men. That doesn't seem to be making them wildly unhappy. So I think there are definitely behavioural things that are susceptible to nudges by society, by government and by the state, and that do change the way that people behave. So we can kind of meet in the middle on that.
We know that people can be educated and we can develop as a consequence of learning. That's certainly not a disputable proposition.
And I also believe that there is no evidence for gender identity in the way that it is used as an idea of a soul. I think that that's the way that it's often used to.
By whom?
By transgender activists.
Yes, well,
they talk about having a female soul, and that to me seems strange. I don't see how you can...
something like biological determinism.
Right.
Which is very... So it's one of the things that's so perversely amusing about these sorts of arguments is that, well, but I attribute it to the lack of demand for logical consistency as a consequence of postmodern thinking. You can believe one thing when it's convenient in one situation and another thing when it's convenient for another. So we're in the perverse position where if you're a man born in a woman's body, that's biologically determined. But if you're a woman born in a woman's body, that's socially constructed. It's like, okay, good luck with that theory.
Right, I don't believe you can be a man born in a woman's body or a woman born in a man's body. What I believe is there are some people who feel alienation towards their bodies and they want to remove...
Well, everybody feels that.
Right, but they feel it to such an extent that the best treatment for them is to transition on them as if they were...
Yeah, well, I don't think that there's any evidence that that's clinically the best treatment. We certainly don't know enough to make that presupposition, and I think we're playing with fire assuming that that's the case. The long-term outcome studies certainly don't demonstrate that. So
I would make a very big distinction then between adults and between children, I think.
That would be a good distinction to make.
Right,
yeah.
but I think we are very quick to diagnose and treat children in a way that I find, and we're not waiting for the research, and that's what I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So,
well, the lawsuits will put it into that in about 15 years.
So there's one place that we found from which that is something that gets me a lot of hate.
I'm sure it does.
A turf and a bigot for that. So I don't think that's something that even we could be able to predict. And I think because that is not now the orthodox feminist position.
I agree completely.
Oh, isn't that good?
So congratulations.
We will learn something. I just wanted to talk quickly about Me Too movement. Tell me your reaction to what's unfolded over the last year. I won't put words in your mouth, but you tell me.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of evidence for reprehensible sexual behavior on the part of people who can use power to get away with it. So that's not so good. The Me Too movement, I suspect it probably did some good things and some terrible things. I would say that there is a dangerous proclivity to abandon the concept of the presumption of innocence.
So university campuses, for example, were to preponderance of evidence. I'm not very happy with that model. I think that's a very big mistake. The presumption of innocence is nothing short of a miracle, and we abandon it at our extreme peril. So I'm not happy with that. I think the belief the victim is something only a fool could conjure up, because it opens the door to unbelievable opportunity for manipulation.
I would disagree with you slightly on that, because I think what that means is that what people are arguing for is don't instantly dismiss or disbelieve the victim.
I know that's partly what they're arguing for. There's plenty of people who are arguing for the fundamental.
Since you're quite the celebrity, darling.
So some people are.
This is no time for jokes, Sylvander.
Not automatically.
We're here to rescue Eric, remember?
Reasonable thing to argue for, but that isn't where it is.
Okay, climate change. I saw you posting a link to a study suggesting that a lot of the way that it's talked about has been overhyped. What are your beliefs about that?
Well, I spent a lot of time. I don't really have beliefs about it. I mean, I think the climate is probably warming. But it's been warming since the last ice age.
It's dramatically accelerated in not even the last decade.
Possibly. It's not so obvious. I spent quite a bit of time going through development literature. I read about 200 books on ecology and economy when I worked for the UN for about 2 years. It's not so obvious what's happening. Just like with any complex society. Fundamentally, isn't really a climate change issue. It's that I find it very difficult to distinguish valid environmental claims from environmental claims that are made as a what we call secondary capital front, essentially. So it's so politicized that it's very difficult to parse out the data from politicization.
So I saw there's a line in the 12 rules which says people stricken with poverty don't care about what's happening outside.
Yeah, that's definitely the case.
And I think that's not an unreasonable point to make, because you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? People, if you can't eat, then actually you can't really worry about what's happening 50 years to the planet. However, I don't think that's a reason not to tackle climate change, because those same people in the global south...
It's partly a reason.
Is it though? Because people in the global south...
All generated planets stop people from starving. So yes, partly the reason. It's certainly the case that making energy more expensive, obviously, makes things more difficult for poor people. So yes, it's definitely an issue. And I would say, it's kind of a conundrum to those on the left. It's like, what's it going to be? Clean air or hungry people? Well, we don't have to choose. It's like, okay.
Or renewable energy, or
good luck with that.
Or nuclear power. Or nuclear power.
Well, it doesn't look like we're moving in that direction very fast.
But that is a solution. I was fascinated. David Attenborough is something kind of close to a national religion in Britain. So there's a bit where you say population control advocates, like in You Prevent Eric Harris, one of the Columbine killers. Why then is it virtuous to propose that the planet would be better off if there were fewer people on it? And I find that completely boggling that you have decided there population control through people not being born and the mass slaughter of people who are always the motivation. Right, tell me more about that.
Well, what kind of statement is the planet would be better off with fewer people on it? First of all, there's an easy solution.
Unfortunately, much to the best efforts of Elon Musk, that is not yet an option. Permanently.
No, that isn't what I mean. That's what I meant, yes. If you're very concerned about your carbon footprint, there's a very fast solution to that.
Laddie.
So, and I think it's disingenuous to... Well, it's the other people, or maybe it's the people who haven't been born yet. It's like, this is also the problem.
Something is still not right.
The environmentalist movement is
Eric,
there's a powerful
those fiends
stream of anti-human sentiment that motivates it.
Here.
And masquerading under the guise of virtue on a planetary scale. It's like, could be. I mean, it's not like we're not fouling our own nest.
That's why I'm fascinated by where you come from, is because the book, is so much about things being in balance and harmony, right? And order and chaos outweigh each other. Well, what overpopulation has done is got to the same...
Who says we have overpopulation?
Well, I think that it's very difficult to see under the current model of fossil fuel-based capitalism. Sorry to use that word, I know it upsets you.
But that is what...
Until we've run out, when we run out of fossil fuels...
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Well, it will happen.
Yeah.
Because there is...
People have been saying that's going to happen for 50 years.
now the United States is a net exporter of fossil fuel. Right. And so no one saw that coming, did they? But it happened.
And you're right, that might be the case, but at the moment I would say that China is putting up new coal-fired power stations by the bucket load. Yeah. It's entirely possible that the stuff that the developed nations did, that now developing nations did, and now
they'll
make themselves richer.
Concerned about clean air when they get richer. That's what the data indicate. Once you get GDP up to about $5,000 per year, people start to become concerned with environmental issues. So if we make people rich fast enough, I don't think so. It'll happen too late for some things. It looks like we're going to top out at about 9 billion. I think we can handle that. I think probably one of the problems that will beset us in 100 years, assuming there are even creatures like us around in 100 years, is that there'll be too few people, not too many. The projections top out at about 9 billion. It's only 2 billion more than we have now. There's every reason to assume that we can cope with that, especially given the rapid decreases in poverty around the world at the moment. There's a bit of a bottleneck. There'll probably be some more extinction. What we're doing to the oceans by overfishing doesn't seem very smart, but we've only been aware of our role as planetary stewards since 1960, I would say, and we're not doing too bad for people who just woke up to the fact that we're actually a planetary force. And I don't think that we're overpopulated. I think all the arguments that all the people who made those arguments in the 1960s, like Paul Ehrlich, I think he wrote The Population Bomb, predicted mass starvation by the year 2000. He was absolutely and completely wrong.
No, we've been very lucky with things like golden rice, for example, genetic engineering of crops. I think
it's not luck.
Well, no, it is. I agree. There, human ingenuity is a huge part of that. Definitely.
Right. Well, and more people, more ingenuity. And Bjorn Lomborg, who I really admire, is skeptical. He's actually going a very long ways to try to figure out what we can do at a planetary level that would actually be useful and productive. His research has indicated the best possible investment is
blood run cold!
Carbon-based fuel is probably the best we can do for care around the world, especially development. Seems right to me. He's done the analysis very carefully.
One more area that you talked about in this course, which obviously is gay parenting. You said the devil is in the detail. We see more studies on that. What do you think might be the adverse effects of having same-sex parents?
Well, I don't think we know what modeling is optimal for children. That's really the issue. I mean, I suspect that 2 parents are better than 1. Suspect. I don't know. 1 parent is definitely worse than 2. We know that. But we don't know what exposure to role models is necessary for the continuity of maternal behavior or for the adoption of functional gender roles. We don't know any of that. And so that's obviously no one knows what the consequence of being raised with 2 people of the same sex is. Maybe none.
Right. So there doesn't seem to be any evidence so far. That's all the literature review suggests that there were a couple that showed problems, but they were in coupledoms, but they were already broken down, right? So there is no evidence. Maybe there will be some time, but at the moment there is no evidence that there is any problem with having gay parents.
I never said there was. Somebody asked me, I believe it was a question like, if there was a problem, what would it be? It's something like that. I mean, you can make a very strong conservative case for gay marriage, I think.
Yeah.
Not that I would necessarily be motivated to make a conservative argument.
David Cameron, our former Prime Minister, said, I support gay marriage because I'm a conservative.
Yes, right. So, it's obviously homosexuality is been around forever. So what's the appropriate social response to that? Well, conceivably, bringing as many people as possible into something approximating the same game. I think you can make a reasonable case for that. What's the consequence of that for children in those families? I don't know. Well, I mean, what I would say is, well, the obvious risk is that there's no one of the opposite sex around. It doesn't take a perception of genius to come up with the observation that might be a problem. Now, maybe it's not. And my suspicions are there's probably far more relevant problems with regards to what happens to children that isn't good than that.
also this is a way in which, that is now a conservative tradition to hold. I think it's 20 years ago that would have been anathema to mainstream conservatives.
Well, people were concerned with the deterioration of marriage and believed that any additional transformations would further weaken it, and I think that that's not an unreasonable position given how weak it's become. And I don't think that that's been good for people overall.
Okay, let's talk about free speech to finish on. You write in your book about Nietzsche, who became the Nazis' favourite intellectual, and you also talk about a professor...
Only through his sister's mistranslations of his work.
Right, but you talk a little bit as well about another professor whose ideas you thought led inevitably to kind of Maoism, and you said, I don't know how he can't be more worried about where his ideas lead. Do you worry about where where your work might be taken and used by other people? I saw you post with...
I worry about that all the time.
With a Pepe flag. Right, but I just think it's...
Seriously, I can't believe you brought that up. You should go online.
Yeah, I do.
There's a...
Believe me, I do.
There's a video called, I think it's called, Is Jordan Peterson the Darling of the Alt-Right? Have you watched the video of the person who put up that flag with me?
Yes,
it's online.
But I have watched it. I have seen... You wouldn't, I would say...
Then why are you concerned about Pepe anyways? Jesus, he disappeared like 3 years ago.
It is...
And most of that was trolling by young guys who were trying to drag idiot accusations.
You got a problem, boy?
White supremacist
We've been looking after you brats for 10 long years.
Like,
Ever since we found you freezing in that snowfield. You owe us your lives. So how about you start showing us some respect?
Okay, but the problem with people ironically pretending to be Nazis on the internet...
They weren't pretending to be Nazis.
But no, this is a separate phenomenon.
Yes,
unfortunately, definitely do ironically pretend to be all the worst things they can possibly be. Is that some people take that very seriously. There was a case in America recently. He was writing stuff for a conservative website. He'd got very into Pizzagate conspiracy theory.
He was probably paranoid.
Right, so there are people who take this very, very seriously and they latch onto it.
You know what your problem is, dear brother?
I'm saying that, how much responsibility do you feel that you have, particularly guys the alt-right, as you say, some of them have enjoyed your work, and say, I'm not one of you guys, I'm not with you guys.
They haven't enjoyed it.
I know how you feel, though.
I've definitely
I hate
read
their big
bits on the
fat
internet.
guts as much as...
Okay.
Find some evidence. I'm extraordinarily sick and tired of this particular
Don't be such a scaredy cat.
Question.
Just hurry up and finish your work so we... Woo,
The
only reason the chief's working with...
First of all, what do you mean by alt-right exactly? Do you mean ethno-nationalists? Do you mean white supremacists?
No, I mean people who are on the right but have got their power base outside the traditional media. They see themselves as an alternative, so I see them coming
That's a pretty loose definition
through that
of the
strain
alt-right.
of Rush Limbaugh kind of talk radio, right? People who see themselves in opposition to the
Rush Limbaugh's not the alt-right. He's been around for 30 years.
Right, so he's the progenitor of what I see now, Breitbart, and things like that, are the new media version of that very old media.
Well, let's define what constitutes alt-right first. For me, they're ethno-nationalists. They tend to be white supremacists.
One of these days,
generally
we're going to get our hands on a whole pile.
Epithet. The reason they're doing that is to associate me with those people. They don't like me. And the reason for that is that I've made it very clear, not only in my videos, but on Twitter, that I don't like them. I don't like their anti-Semitism. I don't like their use of identity politics. I don't agree with their aims. I think that their
First things first,
like, well, if everybody's going to play identity politics, we're going to play it too. And we're going to win. Sense whatsoever with anything to do with the alt-right was because it was extremely convenient of the radical leftists, who I fundamentally detest, to paint me as a representative of that viewpoint.
Right.
Other than that, zero. Now,
okay, but that's not what I did. You say so. At no point did I say you were.
Well, you brought up the whole
right, but I did bring up. But there's a reason I did that, which is that Nietzsche himself said I'm an anti-Semite, right? And yet his ideology and his philosophy ended up being used by the Nazis. So my question to you is, how much responsibility do you feel about the
It isn't
way in
even
which
what I
your
feel.
work
It's
is
not
used?
how much responsibility I feel. It's how much responsibility I take.
Right.
Right. And I take as much responsibility as I possibly can. Right. Which is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm going around the world, I'm talking in different cities, I'm talking to people as much as I can. I'm putting out content that I think is useful for people online, and I'm clarifying what I think. I have 300 videos on YouTube. Virtually, for all intents and purposes, every single word I've said to students in a professional capacity since 1992. And despite the fact that I have innumerable, highly motivated enemies, they haven't been able to find one thing I've said in 30 years that
Tough day?
what would you say, justifies any of those accusations, or any other accusations for that matter. So it's quite the phenomenon. I mean, I understand it to some degree, you know, because...
So, sorry, about the Pepe flags, can you help me explain?
Why
did you pose with it? What were your reasons for doing it?
Just something I picked up on today's raid.
Yeah, it was
My
like posing
birthday's
with...
complete without a present,
I've probably
right?
been photographed with...
Happy birthday, sis.
I don't know.
Huh?
5,000
Is this
people
the
in
best you
last
can
2
do?
years.
A rusty old
And,
necklace?
You know,
Honestly, Eric,
it's one after
you need
the
to try
other,
harder.
often in groups of
What I
100,
really
150,
wanted
or
was the
200
red
people.
orb of Heliodor.
And it's like
Word is,
15
it's
seconds.
a ruby this
Right. And they brought this flag. One of them had spoken at the event. They were doing it ironically. They unfurled the flag.
Well,
and
the word
we took a
is
picture, and
that
was
necklace
that.
has special
Posed ironically with a
It's
hammer and
probably
sickle
just talk, but it seemed about right for a little money grubber like you. I guess you'll just have to put it on
I
and
don't know
find
under
out
the
if...
circumstances what I would have done. I have all sorts of Soviet art in my house.
Right. Because this is the thing, anybody could get caught out, and social embarrassment is a huge factor, and you don't want to kind of tell people who've been very nice to you that actually you don't want to do the thing.
Where did you
I just
get
wonder if
that
that's something
from?
that you regret now, that you
I
wouldn't do
don't
again
know.
if you
It was
had
a
the
copper
opportunity.
coin a minute ago. But as soon as I touched it...
Well, I don't think it did me any good.
It works! It actually works! I can actually turn stuff into gold! Ridiculous!
I don't
This
think
is
I'll
the
betray
best
my
present
former self.
ever!
I'll just leave it where it is. I made the decision that I made under the circumstances and took what was there into consideration. I think that the Pepe formulators did a wonderful job of trolling the standard media. I don't think that they were what everyone presumed them to be.
I think they did a wonderful job of trolling you as well, in a sense, right? Recruiting you and your image and your appeal to people to their kind of cause, which is ironic.
I don't really think so.
But it's not actually.
I think that...
underneath it all, I don't find it very ironic, actually.
What don't you find ironic?
But a lot of the kind of 4chan culture, which is saying, I'm just going to say the worst possible thing that I can say just to prove that I can say it because free speech is still alive. I think that in itself is quite poisonous to the discourse. I think I try and conduct myself online in a relatively civilized manner. I
Been
do
at it
not
again,
always
huh?
succeed, but I do not think just going into a room and screaming epithets
What's the matter,
is something
Eric?
I need to do on a daily
Jealous
basis
of my
to prove that
treasures?
free speech isn't dead, right?
I think we probably agree that
Good.
that's a reasonable...
A rare note of consensus. But I have to come back to the free speech idea because I think that whole idea of the intellectual dark web, and this came up a couple of times at your event on Thursday, is predicated on the idea that you have been marginalised for your opinions or oppressed for your opinions.
Predicated on my claim of that.
Right.
Mia.
It's predicated on...
Yeah, I suppose it is a
I don't
little
know. I'm
small.
not claiming I've been marginalised.
Seriously,
I would never
Mia,
use
it's
that
not
word,
funny.
first of all. That's for
This
sure.
has...
So, but the idea of a dark...
There's no need to shout.
Good, I'm pleased to hear it.
And anyway,
but I do think that
you're
the way
the one
that
that gave me this
got
thing.
The cheers from that crowd was very much about, there was an idea of taboo breaking, right? Oh, this is a microaggression, but I'm going to say it anyway, that, hard work is the way to succeed. And I thought that was fascinating, because to me you don't look like somebody who has particularly suffered an outrageous amount for your opinions. People who certainly disagree, they've been rude, they've
Okay,
The only reason I haven't suffered an outrageous
I have
amount for
been
my
getting
opinions
a little
is because
carried
I've handled
away.
the consequence of their utterance.
Just stop looking at me like that, will you?
My job was at risk, my career was at risk, my family stability
I'm
was
sorry
at
I
risk.
lost my cool,
So,
okay?
I wouldn't push that
just
one too far.
In what way was your job?
No, it's fine.
Jesus. Last year,
I'll stop
200
turning
of
stuff
my
into
fellow
gold.
faculty members signed a petition to get me fired. That was only one of a dozen things that happened. The university wrote me 2 letters, 2 cease and desist letters from their HR departments with their legal staff. 3 of those and you're done.
Why
They
won't
just
it-
fired Rick Maida in Canada at Acadia
wrong?
University for talking
The
about
necklace.
many of the same things
It
that
won't
I've
come
talked
off.
about.
Come on,
So
Mia,
the fact
stop
that I've
fooling
come
around.
through this relatively unscathed has very little to do with the vitriol
I'm
of the
serious.
attack.
I can't...
There was plenty of motivation to take me out. It just didn't work.
Right, and I think the fact that it didn't work
What's
to me
happening
makes
now?
me ultimately
I didn't
optimistic
do
about where
anything.
we are because I went on. I did a panel a while ago with Zarbinar, a Burmese comedian who was imprisoned for making a
Don't
joke,
move.
right? and we are not yet at that stage. I think, undoubtedly, I get...
We're not. We're damn close.
Really?
How about the guy with the pug in the UK?
Count Dankula.
That's the one.
Right, but he did actually, I mean...
What the hell's going on?
It was a joke. Am I not right? I didn't say it was a good joke. I didn't say it was an appropriate joke. I didn't say any of that. I didn't say it was a well-thought-through joke. But it was a joke.
Yeah, I just fundamentally don't believe that it was a joke. I believe that it was camouflaged as a joke, and that's what it kind of comes across.
Right,
and
well, that's exactly what you would believe if you were inclined to persecute comedians.
No, I'm not inclined to persecute someone.
Well, you're inclined to persecute him.
I don't think he's a comedian, and I don't think... I'd have to go to the circumstances of that case, but I think...
He didn't like his girlfriend's pug. He thought he would teach him to do something reprehensible as a joke.
Right, but I see you getting involved, say, for example, like Tommy Robinson, and I think you see that as a free speech issue, and that's not how I see Tommy Robinson's case at all. I see that as contempt of court, someone who endangered a grooming trial. How do you see that case?
I see it as very fortunate that Tommy Robinson didn't die in prison.
I think I would say that about a lot of people in prison. I think it's very hard to be in prison if you're a sex offender, for example. I think British prisons are less inhumane than American prisons, but they're still brutal places to be. However, I do think that was an appropriate punishment for somebody who tried to collapse a grooming trial. But are you a prison abolitionist?
No.
Oh, right, okay. So you do believe that some people there are offences for which people need to go to prison?
Why would you ask me a question like that?
I'm just
I look like
interested.
someone who isn't interested in meting out appropriate punishment?
No, but I just thought maybe I was made an assumption about you. And I didn't want to make an assumption about you. I'm just going to end with a quick fire round. So I know that this is YouTube, so we have been able to talk for a really long time, but I just want quick answers from you. Who is your favourite author?
It was all my fault.
Who's your favourite female?
After what happened, I ran away. I wanted to leave this... I asked around about the necklace on my travels and finally found out what it was.
I don't know her.
She's a Canadian.
Given my sister a cursed
kind of an antidote
relic.
to Margaret Atwood, in my estimation.
Okay.
To forget
When
who
did you
I
last
was
cry?
and what I'd done.
Oh God, who knows? Last week.
So I threw myself into any adventure
Who is
that
your
came
smartest
along,
opponent?
and before I knew it, I was living as a thief. That's when I met him. The guy who called
Sam Harris is pretty
himself
smart.
the Seer.
Because you've had debates
He
about
told me to go
atheism
after the
and
orb.
about rationality.
That if I did,
Yeah, I don't
I'd
really
meet the
regard
luminary
exactly
somewhere
as an
deep
opponent,
underground.
You know, I mean, we
And that if I
disagree on
helped him,
things. I don't really tend to think of
at
people as
first,
opponents.
I didn't believe a word of it.
I mean,
Kind
but
of
Harris
circles
is,
I was moving in,
Harris is
you
smart.
learn
He's
pretty
good at
quickly not to trust anyone
making
but
his
yourself.
case. So that's been interesting.
But sure enough,
What big question?
I
don't
went
you
after the
know answer
orb.
to?
I wound up underground, and I met you.
What big question do you have to answer to? God.
Your memory, laddie. It's back.
It is. Thanks to you
Well,
guys.
personally, it's what I should do
Guess
in
I've
2
been kind of a
years.
pain these last few days, huh?
When did you
I'll make it
last
up
change
to
your
you, I
mind about
promise.
something important?
I'm changing my mind about things all the time.
Who knows if I'll
Every
ever
time I
find
do a
the
lecture,
forgiveness the
I change
seer
my mind about
promised me.
something.
But something important,
And
something
everything
big.
else he
Oh,
said.
well, I can tell you, I mean, one thing I've learned in the last 2 years is that
You saw it, right?
I think
The statue my sister
overestimated-
turned into was
There's
right
an
here.
obesity epidemic in North
If this
America.
Gildigger guy is collecting
Perhaps for
all
the
the
rest of
gold
the
he can
world.
get his hands on, maybe he took her
I
too.
think
I heard those golden
overestimated
goons saying he's holed up in a
consequence
castle
of the
north of
sedentary
here.
lifestyle, and
I'm gonna get Mia back if it's the
overestimated
last thing I do.
Which a lack of discipline was contributing to it. I think much more now that it's an illness.
Then it looks like we're all
Those are
headed
two
the
different
same
things,
way.
aren't they? Discipline is self-control. and
Thanks again,
illness
you
is
guys.
Something else.
It's good to
Well,
be
let's
back.
say you're overweight. You should exercise. It's like, well, actually, the evidence that exercise will thin you down isn't that great. And maybe the reason that you're not exercising is because you're ill, not that you're ill because you're not exercising. So I have a lot more sympathy for the hypothesis that the obesity epidemic is actually a consequence of an illness, of a broad scale. Illness isn't exactly right. It's a dietary problem, fundamentally. And there are deep causes for that.
Are you still eating your all-beef diet?
Unfortunately, yes.
Really, just beef. Not. Can you have like ketchup on it?
Nothing. Right. Yes, I wouldn't. It isn't something I would likely recommend. It's a little hard on your social life. It makes traveling quite difficult, and it's dull as hell. But
what has it done to you?
Well, I lost 50 pounds in 7 months. Stopped snoring. I had some autoimmune conditions that seem to have gone away. I'm not taking antidepressants. My mood isn't perfectly regulated, but I'm under a fair bit of stress, so that might have something to do with it. I sleep much less. I can work more.
Imagine
I
your
don't have
arteries might not
GERDs.
be in
I
great shape.
I don't think there's any evidence that I don't think we have any idea what causes arteriosclerosis. I think all of the dietary knowledge we have is rubbish. And in partly because it's unbelievably difficult to do proper dietary studies. You can't do controlled studies. It's all correlational. And there's so many variables. I think the correlational studies are useless. So, also this all meat diet, this all beef diet has apparently cured my daughter. So,
You had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis?
Well, that was the original diagnosis, and it was idiopathic, which means we don't know what the hell's causing it. Yeah, but she's completely symptom-free. So, that sort of thing makes you sit up and take notice, because it doesn't make any sense.
When was the last time you lied? The book says, no lying. Do you still lie?
Everybody lies.
As Dr. House himself told us. What is most
But
important?
I'm pretty damn careful about it.
What is most important to you in life?
Not being stupid.
How would your life
Not making foolish mistakes. Not being incautious.
That's tough on yourself.
Life's tough, man.
Right. How would your life have been different if you'd been born female?
Multiple orgasms.
It's not a bad one. What's your biggest regret?
That I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to learn to play the organ when I was 7.
If that's your biggest regret, that's going to be a great deathbed. Because that's...
Yeah, well,
that's
you know, I would have liked... It would have been better for me if I would have been a better musician.
And finally, how would you like to be remembered?
As someone honest.
Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you very much.
He's undeniably one of the greatest intellectual phenomenons of our generation. Dr. Jordan Peterson's work as a clinical psychology professor at the University of Toronto has catapulted him to international fame with arguments that are challenging and changing the way we all think. He's captured the attention of millions, especially of young men, but some young women as well. And many of you, however, have never heard of him, but you will get to know him for the first time through this interview. Today he is here, breaking down his provocative rules for life and the prescription for success that will surprise you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So it is an interesting group of insights that you offer us. I can enter it in many ways, but let me just start with, to me, perhaps the most obvious, which is, what is it that you're saying that's resonating with so many people? What itch are you scratching?
I think there's probably 2. We've had a long conversation in our culture about the necessity for self-esteem and happiness, and that's not what I'm talking about. I tell my audiences and my readers very straightforwardly that life is difficult and that there's a lot of suffering in it, and that you have to learn how to conduct yourself in the face of that. The problem with the pursuit of happiness is that when life's storms come along, happiness disappears, and then you're left with nothing. So you need to pursue something that's deeper than happiness. And if happiness comes along, well then, hooray for you. You don't want to despise it because it's fleeting, but it's much better to pursue things that are meaningful than things that make you happy. It's deeper, and it orients you more appropriately, and it keeps you centered in your own life. It makes you more useful for your family and your community. So that's one thing. And it's a relief to young people to know that the baseline conditions of life are difficult, but that you can still prevail. So it's a funny message in some sense, or a strange message, because on the one hand it's somewhat pessimistic. I talk about suffering and malevolence also, but I also emphasize the fact that despite that being the base conditions of existence, people are tough enough to prevail. So that's one element of it. The other element is the necessity of responsibility. So a lot of what people find in life that provides them with a sustaining meaning is a consequence of not the pursuit of rights or the pursuit of happiness or the development of self-esteem, but the adoption of responsibility. And the more responsibility, in some sense, the better. Responsibility for yourself, make sure that your life lays itself out like it should. Responsibility for your family, responsibility for the community. It's people who take responsibility that are the ones that you admire. And that's the right pathway through life. That's where meaning is to be found. And I think that's probably the crucial issue, is that identification of a profound relationship between responsibility and meaning. And for many of the people that I'm talking with, it seems like that's the first time that that's being articulated for them.
So speaking about responsibility and meaning and how to make sense of a world where so many people feel isolated, I'll come back to that. That seems so helpful. And yet, a lightning rod in many ways, with a lot of harsh comments, especially in the print media. What is it that your critics are arguing?
Well, I got embroiled in some political dispute, I would say, in my home front in Canada when our government introduced some legislation that purported to be about compassion, which to my way of thinking was about compulsion with regards to speech. And so that's tangled me up. But I also think that people aren't necessarily that happy with a message of personal responsibility when they're really interested in the mechanics of social change. Now, my sense is that, well, life is unfair. Social structures are unfair. The arbitrary way that illness is distributed into the population is unfair. But despite that, the best level of analysis for rectifying that in a practical sense, but also in a psychological sense, is the level of the individual. And so people who think in a collectivist manner, or people who are playing identity politics games that insist that your group identity should be your hallmark, don't like what I have to say at all. And they have their reasons. I'm not a fan of identity politics types. I think it's a very, very dangerous game, particularly because it makes us tribal.
Guys, because
tribal people are very dangerous.
Calling so I'm going to bed.
As we
I'm just going to go to bed. I'm going to wake my ass up.
The probability of violence increases as far as I'm concerned.